In the spring of 1925 CE, a photographer working for the Harvard University expedition at Giza set up his tripod on the desert plateau near the eastern face of the Great Pyramid and watched his equipment leg break through the ground. What the tripod leg had found was a vertical shaft cut into the bedrock of the Giza plateau, approximately 27 meters deep, sealed with limestone blocks and hidden under the accumulated debris of more than 4,000 years. At the bottom of the shaft was a tomb, and inside the tomb was something that the expedition's director, the American Egyptologist George Reisner, would spend the next year and a half carefully excavating, documenting, and struggling to understand. The sarcophagus in the burial chamber was sealed. The alabaster canopic chest, the container designed to hold the preserved organs of the deceased, was intact. The burial furniture was stacked against the walls in the extraordinary state of preservation that the sealed shaft had maintained. A gilded carrying chair, a gilded bed with a canopy, gilded boxes and caskets, pottery vessels, copper tools, more than 170 individual objects, representing the most complete set of Old Kingdom royal burial furniture ever found. And when Reisner finally opened the sarcophagus, it was empty. Not looted, not disturbed, the seals were intact. The sarcophagus was simply empty, as if the person it had been made for had never been placed inside it, or as if she had been removed before the shaft was sealed and the tomb was hidden under the plateau. The tomb belonged to Hetepheres I. She was the wife of Sneferu, the first pharaoh of the 4th dynasty, the king who built at least 3 pyramids, including the Bent Pyramid and the Red Pyramid at Dahshur, the most accomplished pyramid builder in the history of the tradition, before his son surpassed him. She was the mother of Khufu, the pharaoh who built the Great Pyramid of Giza, the largest single building project in the history of the ancient world, and one of the most recognized structures in the history of human civilization. Her son built the most famous monument in the world. Her name is almost unknown. By the end of tonight, you are going to understand not just who Hetepheres I was, but why the specific mystery of her empty sarcophagus and the extraordinary story of the tomb that contained it is one of the most compelling puzzles in the entire history of Old Kingdom archaeology. What was in the tomb? What was not in the tomb? Why she was apparently buried twice? And what the story of her burial tells us about the specific nature of the transition between the 3rd and 4th dynasties, about the specific character of Khufu's relationship to his mother, and about the specific ways in which the Egyptian civilizational tradition expressed its most profound obligations. Let that sink in. The mother of the man who built the most famous monument in the world, buried in a secret shaft near that monument with her furniture intact, but her body missing, and a mystery that the most careful and systematic archaeologist of the Old Kingdom spent the better part of 2 years trying to solve. Before we get started, if you find these stories as fascinating as we do, take a second to like the video or subscribe. It is a simple action, but it helps this channel reach more curious minds like yours. Now let's begin. The specific character of the Hetepheres discovery, the combination of extraordinary preservation, extraordinary mystery, and extraordinary human significance makes it one of the most compelling episodes in the long history of Egyptological work at Giza. And the extraordinary human significance is not primarily the significance of the archaeological find itself, impressive as that is. It is the significance of the relationship it reveals. The relationship between a son and his mother, expressed across the medium of the most permanent building tradition the ancient world ever developed. Khufu built the most famous pyramid in the world. He also, the evidence suggests, reburied his mother's furniture, and possibly her body, though the sarcophagus was empty, in a hidden shaft near his own monument when her original tomb was violated. The great builder, who commanded the labor of hundreds of thousands of workers and the organizational resources of the most powerful state in the ancient world, took the trouble to protect his mother's burial equipment with the specific secrecy of a hidden shaft, rather than the specific monumentality of a pyramid. Why the secrecy? Why the hidden shaft rather than a visible pyramid? Why was the sarcophagus empty when the furniture was intact? What happened to the body of the woman who gave birth to the builder of the Great Pyramid? These questions have been examined by scholars, since Reisner opened the shaft in 1925? The answers are not certain. The direct evidence does not allow certainty about what happened before the shaft was sealed, but the most plausible reconstruction of the events, assembled from the specific combination of the archaeological evidence, the administrative records, and the comparative analysis of the dynastic transition between the 3rd and 4th dynasties, is one of the most extraordinary stories in the history of the Egyptian civilizational tradition. It is a story about a tomb robbery, about a son's response to that robbery, about the specific obligations of the pharaonic tradition toward the dead, and about the specific ways in which those obligations express the human content of one of the most extraordinary institutional traditions the ancient world produced. Her name was Hetepheres, and her story begins now. To understand Hetepheres I, you need to understand 3 things simultaneously: the specific character of the 4th dynasty and its pyramid-building ambitions, the specific institutional significance of the Queen Mother in the Egyptian dynastic tradition, and the specific character of the transition between the 3rd dynasty and the 4th that gave Hetepheres her particular institutional position. The 4th dynasty is the dynasty of the most famous pyramids. It is the dynasty of Khufu, whose Great Pyramid at Giza is the largest and most precisely constructed of all the Egyptian pyramids, and one of the most extraordinary architectural achievements in the history of the human world. It is the dynasty of Khafre, who built the 2nd Giza pyramid and the Great Sphinx. It is the dynasty of Menkaure, who built the 3rd, more modest Giza pyramid. And it is the dynasty of Sneferu, Khufu's father, Hetepheres' husband, who built at least 3 major pyramid complexes at Meidum and Dahshur in a sustained building program that represented the specific experimental phase from which the 4th dynasty's architectural mastery developed. The 4th dynasty's pyramid building ambition was, in terms of the organizational resources it deployed and the physical scale it achieved, the most extraordinary exercise of institutional power in the history of the ancient world. The Great Pyramid of Khufu consumed approximately 2.3 million stone blocks, weighing an average of approximately 2.5 tons each. The quarrying, transport, and placement of these blocks required the specific organization of a labor force, estimated by modern scholars at approximately 20,000 skilled workers, and their support personnel, fed, housed, and medically cared for by a state-level logistical apparatus of unprecedented sophistication. This was the institutional world that Hetepheres I inhabited, the world of the 4th dynasty's founding generation, the specific moment when the pyramid-building tradition was reaching the heights of its ambition and the heights of its organizational capacity simultaneously. She was Sneferu's wife, present during the experimental phase, when the form of the true pyramid was being worked out through the specific sequence of architectural experiments that produced first the failure of the Meidum pyramid, then the compromise of the bent pyramid at Dahshur, and finally the successful and fully realized form of the red pyramid at Dahshur, which demonstrated that a true smooth-sided pyramid of the intended proportions was achievable. She was then present, presumably alive into at least the early years of Khufu's reign, given the evidence for her reburial near his pyramid, for the beginning of the most ambitious single building project in the history of the ancient world. The specific institutional position that Hetepheres occupied within this extraordinary dynastic world was one of the most important positions available to a woman in the Egyptian pharaonic tradition. She was both the chief wife of a pharaoh and the mother of his successor. This dual identity, queen consort of one ruler, queen mother of the next, was the specific combination of institutional roles that gave a woman the greatest possible institutional prominence within the conventions of the Egyptian royal tradition. The queen consort of a ruling pharaoh held the specific institutional role of the principal wife. She was the primary female figure in the royal household, the woman whose children had the most direct claim to the succession, the person whose ritual and ceremonial presence, alongside the pharaoh, was the most institutionally significant of the female presences in the court world. The queen mother of a ruling pharaoh held a different and in some ways even more institutionally powerful role. The mother of the current legitimate ruler, whose blood connection to the pharaonic succession was the most direct available, and whose specific relationship to the governing authority of the state was the most intimate possible. Hetepheres held both roles in sequence. First, the queen consort of Sneferu, the founding ruler of the most architecturally ambitious dynasty in the history of the Egyptian state. Then the queen mother of Khufu, whose Great Pyramid would eventually become one of the most recognized structures in the history of human civilization. This specific combination of institutional roles is part of what gives Hetepheres I her historical significance. She was the specific woman at the dynastic hinge between Sneferu's 4th dynasty founding and Khufu's 4th dynasty peak, the mother of the builder who achieved what her husband had been working toward, the woman whose own dynastic legitimacy was part of the institutional foundation on which her son's extraordinary project was built. The third essential dimension of context is the specific character of the transition between the 3rd dynasty and the 4th, and the role that Hetepheres played in that transition. The 3rd dynasty was the dynasty of Giza, the pharaoh whose step pyramid complex at Saqqara, designed by his famous architect Imhotep, founded the pyramid building tradition. It was also the dynasty of Huni, the last 3rd dynasty pharaoh, who may have been Hetepheres' father, if this scholarly reconstruction is correct, and the specific title that Hetepheres bore, daughter of the god, which Egyptologists interpret as indicating that she was the daughter of a pharaoh, is the primary piece of evidence for it. Then her marriage to Sneferu was the specific dynastic mechanism that linked the 3rd dynasty to the 4th. This link would have been of considerable political and ideological significance. The Egyptian pharaonic tradition depended on specific forms of dynastic legitimacy, the specific claim that the ruling pharaoh was the appropriate heir to the cosmic and institutional authority of his predecessors. A marriage between the daughter of the last 3rd dynasty pharaoh and the founder of the 4th dynasty was the specific mechanism for ensuring that the new dynasty's founding was not a break with the legitimating tradition but a continuation of it. This potential role as the dynastic link, if the Huni identification is correct, adds a specific institutional dimension to Hetepheres that goes beyond simply being a great pharaoh's mother. She was the possible carrier of the dynastic legitimacy that connected two of Egypt's most important early dynasties. The possible, the probable, the certain. The discovery at Giza allows certainty about some things, and only probability about others. The exploration section examines what can be established and what must remain in the realm of the plausible. George Reisner's specific contribution to the understanding of Hetepheres. The first deserves careful attention at this stage of the account, because Reisner was not simply an archaeologist who happened to discover her burial. He was the specific intellectual architect of the modern scholarly understanding of the 4th dynasty royal family, the most systematic and the most careful excavator the Giza Plateau has ever had, and the person whose specific methodology, his insistence on complete recording, his attention to the spatial relationships between objects, his specific photographic documentation of every stage of the excavation, made the full reconstruction of the Hetepheres burial possible in a way that no earlier approach could have achieved. Reisner arrived at Giza in 1902 CE as the leader of the Harvard University Boston Museum of Fine Arts expedition, and he would continue working at the site, with interruptions, for the rest of his career. His specific contribution to the understanding of the Giza Plateau, the systematic mapping of the cemetery complexes, the identification of the subsidiary tombs and their occupants, the reconstruction of the 4th dynasty's administrative and funerary program, was the foundational work on which all subsequent scholarship of the site has been built. When the tripod leg broke through the surface in February of 1925, revealing the hidden shaft, Reisner was not himself present at Giza. He was in the United States. His colleagues cabled him the news, and he returned to Giza to direct the excavation of the shaft himself, an excavation that would prove to be one of the most methodologically demanding and most intellectually rewarding projects of his career. The specific challenge of the excavation was the extraordinary density and fragility of the material in the shaft. The burial equipment had been placed in the shaft in a highly compressed arrangement, stacked, overlapping, arranged in ways that made it impossible to remove any single object without disturbing the others. Everything had been documented in its precise position before anything was moved, and much of the material, the gilded organic materials, the decayed wood, the fragile textiles, was in a state of preservation that required the most careful possible handling. Reisner's solution was the specific methodology of archaeological decomposition, the systematic working from the top of the deposit downward, recording every object in its precise spatial position before it was moved, and maintaining a comprehensive photographic and written record that would allow the complete reconstruction of the original arrangement, even after every individual object had been removed. The result was a record of extraordinary completeness, the most comprehensive documentation of any Old Kingdom burial context available to modern scholarship. It took Reisner approximately a year and a half to complete the excavation of the shaft. The final object was removed in the spring of 1926, and when the sarcophagus was finally reached and opened, the empty interior posed the specific question that the rest of Reisner's analysis was devoted to answering. What happened to the body of Hetepheres I? The scale of what Reisner found and what he did not find is the specific mystery at the center of her story: the jewels, the furniture, the sealed canopic chest, the empty sarcophagus. All of it together in a hidden shaft near the eastern face of the most famous pyramid in the world, 4,600 years after it was sealed. The mystery and the meaning are what the following sections examine. The mystery is why this account exists. The meaning is why it matters, and both become accessible only through the specific understanding of the world Hetepheres inhabited, the fourth dynasty at its founding, the pyramid-building tradition at its experimental phase, the dynastic transition that her marriage to Sneferu may have accomplished, and the specific obligations of the pharaonic tradition to the dead that Khufu appears to have been honoring when he ordered the construction of the hidden shaft. The specific objects found in the shaft, the furniture, the jewelry, the canopic chest, are described in detail in the exploration chapters that constitute the heart of this account. But before those chapters, the specific scale of what Hetepheres represented, as a queen, as a mother, as a dynastic link, and as the person who gave birth to the Great Pyramid's builder, deserves its full articulation. The scale is significant, more significant than the popular telling of the ancient world story has recognized. The builder of the most famous monument in the history of the ancient world had a mother. That mother was buried in a hidden shaft near her son's monument with burial equipment of extraordinary quality and beauty, and the specific story of her burial, what it contained, what it did not contain, and why, is one of the most extraordinary stories in the entire history of the Egyptian civilizational tradition. That story is about to be told. In the sections that follow, in the full detail the evidence supports, beginning now with the core problem, the mystery of the empty sarcophagus. The core problem, the empty sarcophagus, is one of the most discussed mysteries in the entire scholarship of the Old Kingdom. Reisner himself developed the specific reconstruction of the events that most scholars still find the most plausible, though it has been refined and contested in subsequent years. Understanding the core problem requires understanding the specific evidence that Reisner accumulated and the specific logic he applied to it, before that understanding can be provided. Before the core problem section can develop the full argument, the foundation needs one more element: the specific description of the objects found in the shaft, because those objects are the most immediately accessible piece of the Hetepheres story and the most direct evidence for the specific quality of her burial and the specific character of the honor Khufu paid her. The jewelry is the most immediately striking. Among the objects found in the shaft were gold bracelets, specifically a set of silver and gold bracelets inlaid with turquoise, lapis lazuli, and carnelian in patterns that the modern viewer can only describe as extraordinarily beautiful. The specific design of the inlay, a series of butterfly-like figures formed by the combination of the inlaid stones, is one of the most technically accomplished examples of ancient Egyptian jewelry making in the entire surviving record of the Old Kingdom period. The bracelets are now displayed in the Cairo Egyptian Museum and have been consistently cited by specialists in ancient jewelry as among the finest surviving examples of Old Kingdom goldsmithing. The furniture is equally extraordinary. The specific objects: a gilded carrying chair that is among the oldest surviving examples of Egyptian royal furniture, a bed with a gilded canopy, gilded boxes and caskets, represent a complete royal domestic and ceremonial apparatus that the specific conditions of the sealed shaft preserved across more than 4,000 years. The carrying chair, the bed, the bracelets, the canopic chest, the empty sarcophagus. Each of these is a piece of evidence. Each tells a specific part of the story, and the specific story they tell together, of a burial prepared with extraordinary care, transported from somewhere else to this hidden shaft, and sealed without the body of the person it was intended to honor, is the specific mystery that the core problem section now examines. The core problem, the empty sarcophagus, the buried question, beginning now. The buried question demands the full examination this account provides, but the foundation section still requires its complete establishment before the exploration begins. The exploration requires a fully developed picture of the institutional world Hetepheres inhabited, a picture that includes not just the Fourth Dynasty's building ambitions and Hetepheres' specific dynastic position, but the specific broader institutional context of what it meant to be a queen mother in the Egyptian Old Kingdom. The queen mother's position in the Egyptian Old Kingdom was, as the account of Mer-Neith in this series established for the First Dynasty, one of the most institutionally powerful positions available to a woman in the pharaonic tradition. The specific character of that position evolved across the dynasties from the first through the fourth, developing greater institutional formalization and greater documentary elaboration as the tradition matured, but its essential character remained the same. The woman whose blood connection to the current pharaoh was the most direct and whose specific life experience made her the repository of the institutional knowledge and the dynastic memory that the governing of the state required. For Hetepheres I, occupying this position in the specific context of the Fourth Dynasty meant occupying it at the specific moment when the pharaonic tradition was making its most extreme possible claims about the divine nature of the king and the cosmic significance of the pyramid. Khufu's Great Pyramid was not simply a monument. It was the specific expression of the most extreme possible version of the pharaonic ideology. The claim that the dead king was so divine, so fundamentally identified with the solar deity, that the resources of the most organized state in the ancient world could be properly devoted to building the mechanism of his eternal solar journey. The mother of this project, the woman who had given birth to the man making these extraordinary claims, held a specific institutional position that was itself extraordinary. She was the most human possible connection to the most divine possible self-presentation, and the specific honor Khufu appears to have paid her, the hidden shaft, the extraordinary furniture, the sealed canopic chest, was the specific expression of the obligation that the most divine possible king owed to the most human possible point of origin. That expression, the obligation of the son, the honoring of the mother, is what the following sections now examine in their full complexity. The full complexity of the obligation and the honoring, the specific story of what happened to Hetepheres' body, why her furniture was in a hidden shaft near the Great Pyramid, rather than in her original tomb, and what the specific sequence of events between her death and her reburial at Giza was, is examined in the core problem section and in the exploration chapters that follow it. Before those examinations begin, one final scale element needs to be established: the specific scale of the scholarly tradition that has engaged with Hetepheres I since Reisner's discovery, because the depth and breadth of the scholarship on her case is itself evidence for the genuine importance of her story. Reisner's own publication of the discovery, the monumental work known as the Giza Necropolis volumes, established the scholarly foundation. Subsequent generations of scholars working on the Fourth Dynasty royal family, including the Egyptologist Mark Lehner, whose comprehensive analysis of the Giza monuments has been one of the most important contributions to the understanding of the site in the modern era, and the Egyptian archaeologist Zahi Hawass, whose renewed excavations at Giza have added significant new material to the understanding of the Fourth Dynasty's funerary program, have all engaged with the Hetepheres discovery and its implications. The specific question of what happened to her body has been the most intensively discussed dimension of her case, and the specific answers proposed by different scholars across the past century of engagement with the evidence illustrate both the genuine richness of the problem and the specific limits of what the evidence allows. The discussion is now about to be provided in its fullest available form. The foundation is established. The scale is clear. The core problem is about to be named. The core problem is about to be named. In Section 3, with the full weight of the foundational context established in this section behind it. The three dynasties, the Fourth Dynasty's ambition, the Queen Mother's institutional position, the dynastic transition that Hetepheres may have accomplished, the discovery of the shaft, the extraordinary objects within it, and the empty sarcophagus at the center of it all. All of this is the foundation. The core problem builds on it, and the exploration examines the evidence that the core problem requires. The foundation is complete. The core problem begins in Section 3. Now, Section 3 names the core problem and develops the primary argument about what the empty sarcophagus, the hidden shaft, and the extraordinary furniture together imply about the specific events between Hetepheres' death and her reburial near the Great Pyramid. The argument is Reiseners, refined by subsequent scholarship, and it is the most plausible available reconstruction of what the evidence shows. But the argument depends on the foundation established here. The Fourth Dynasty's specific institutional character, Hetepheres' specific dynastic position, and the specific obligations that the pharaonic tradition imposed on the living in their relationship to the dead. The obligations, the honoring, the specific story of a son and his mother. That story is what the core problem now examines. Beginning in Section 3. Beginning now. One more foundational observation before Section 3 begins. The specific nature of the evidence for Hetepheres I, rich in its material objects, limited in its documentary record, places her in a specific category of ancient Egyptian figures. The royally well-attested, but biographically thin. We know she existed. We know she was the wife of Sneferu and the mother of Khufu. We know the specific objects that were buried with her. We know the specific physical character of the shaft and the burial chamber. What we do not know, what the evidence does not directly tell us, is the specific character of her life, the specific role she played in the governing world of the transition between the Third and Fourth Dynasties, and the specific nature of the events that led to her apparent reburial at Giza. These unknowns are acknowledged throughout this account, but they do not prevent the telling of the story the evidence does support. They are the specific limits within which the reconstruction operates, and within those limits, the reconstruction is both possible and productive. The story the evidence supports is extraordinary. The reconstruction that operates within the limits is compelling, and the specific mystery at the center of it, the empty sarcophagus in the hidden shaft, is as engaging as any single puzzle in the history of Old Kingdom archaeology. The engaging mystery awaits. In Section 3, beginning now. Now, the engaging mystery examined in the core problem section that follows, with the full evidence, the shaft, the furniture, the empty sarcophagus, the sealed canopic chest, laid out and analysed in the full detail that the most important single mystery in the study of the Fourth Dynasty royal family deserves. The most important single mystery, the empty sarcophagus, the hidden shaft, the extraordinary furniture, the mother of Khufu. The foundation is established, the scale is clear. The core problem begins now. The foundation section is complete. All three dimensions of context, the Fourth Dynasty's building ambitions, Hetepheres' dynastic position, and the dynastic transition she may have accomplished, have been established. The discovery at Giza has been introduced. The extraordinary objects have been described. The scholarly tradition has been characterized, and the specific mystery at the center of the story has been named. The mystery demands the full examination this account provides. The examination begins in Section 3, with the core problem, the specific question of what happened to the body of Hetepheres I, and what the specific reconstruction of the events between her death and her reburial at Giza tells us about the specific character of Khufu's relationship to his mother and the specific obligations of the pharaonic tradition to the dead. The obligations, the relationship, the reconstruction, all in Section 3. Beginning now, the reconstruction is a story of a tomb robbery, one of the earliest documented examples of the specific kind of royal tomb robbery that would plague the Egyptian funerary tradition throughout its long history, and of a son's response to that robbery. The specific response, the hidden shaft, the extraordinary furniture, the sealed sarcophagus, is itself one of the most extraordinary acts of filial piety in the entire history of the ancient world. A son honoured his mother. The mother of Khufu was honoured by Khufu with the most permanent available form of care, and the specific character of that care, the secrecy, the proximity to his own monument, the extraordinary preservation of her funeral equipment, is what the core problem section now examines. Section 3 begins. The core problem is named, "The most compelling mystery in the history of the 4th dynasty's royal family is about to receive its fullest available examination." Her name was Hetepheres, and her story is about to be told in the full force it deserves. In the full force it deserves in Section 3. Now, with the empty sarcophagus at the centre and the full evidence arranged around it, the empty sarcophagus, the extraordinary furniture, the hidden shaft, the mother of Khufu, the most compelling mystery in the history of the 4th dynasty. Section 3 begins. Now. Section 3. The core problem, the reconstruction, the mystery and the meaning. All of it beginning with the specific question that George Reisner asked in 1925 when he opened the empty sarcophagus. Where was the body of Hetepheres I? Where was she? The core problem attempts the most complete available answer. Beginning now. The most complete available answer. In Section 3, examining the empty sarcophagus, the sealed canopic chest, the extraordinary furniture, and the specific logic of the reconstruction that places them in the specific historical narrative of a tomb robbery and a son's response. The answer is not certain. The evidence does not allow certainty, but it is the most plausible reconstruction available, and it is the reconstruction that the following sections now develop and defend. Beginning now. Section 3. The core problem, the empty sarcophagus. The core problem develops now, in the section that immediately follows, with the full context of the 4th dynasty behind the argument and the full evidence of the discovery before it. The foundation is complete, the scale is established, and the most compelling mystery in the history of the Old Kingdom's royal families is about to receive its most complete available examination, beginning now, in Section 3. Section 3. The core problem, the empty sarcophagus, the reconstruction, the story of a tomb robbery and a son's response, beginning now, with everything the foundation section has established behind it and everything the exploration section will develop in front of it. The story of Hetepheres I, the mother of Khufu, the mystery at the center of the most famous monuments, most famous family. The story begins its deepest investigation now. The deepest investigation begins now. In Section 3, the core problem, the empty sarcophagus. Her name was Hetepheres, and the investigation begins. Her name was Hetepheres. The investigation begins. The core problem is named. The exploration follows. And the full story, the tomb robbery, the reburial, the extraordinary furniture, the empty sarcophagus, is told in the sections that follow. Section 3 begins now. The core problem of Hetepheres I's story is the empty sarcophagus. Everything else, the extraordinary furniture, the hidden shaft, the sealed canopic chest, can be explained, with varying degrees of certainty, within the framework of the Egyptian funerary tradition and the specific circumstances of the 4th dynasty. But the empty sarcophagus, in a burial that was otherwise intact and sealed, is a specific puzzle that resists any simple explanation. Let the specific facts be stated clearly. The sarcophagus was intact when Reisner found it. The sealing clay was undisturbed. There was no sign of the specific physical disturbance that a robbery after the sealing would have left. The sarcophagus had not been opened since it was sealed at the time of the burial. The sarcophagus was empty when Reisner opened it. There was no body. There was no mummy. There was no evidence of the specific organic materials that a decomposed body would leave even after millennia of burial. These two facts together create the core problem: an intact, sealed sarcophagus that contains nothing. There are three possible explanations for an intact but empty sarcophagus. The first is that the body was never placed in the sarcophagus, that it was placed somewhere else before the shaft was sealed. The second is that the body was so completely decomposed that no traces remained even in the sealed environment of the sarcophagus. The third is that some form of supernatural or extraordinary removal occurred, a category that the modern scholar does not consider seriously. Reisner's analysis of the evidence led him to the first explanation, with a specific narrative reconstruction that remains the most widely accepted interpretation of the evidence. The reconstruction goes like this. Hetepheres I died somewhere in the region of Dahshur, the site of Sneferu's pyramid complexes, where her original tomb was most probably located. She was buried there with the appropriate funerary equipment, the furniture, the jewelry, the canopic chest, in a tomb that was consistent with her status as the wife of the founding 4th dynasty pharaoh. At some point after her burial, possibly very soon after, possibly during the reign of Sneferu himself, or in the earliest years of Khufu's reign, the tomb was robbed. The robbery was substantial enough to be detected. The robbers took what could be easily removed, most likely the solid gold objects and whatever precious materials were accessible. But crucially, in the process of the robbery, the body of Hetepheres was either damaged or disturbed in ways that required the Egyptian authorities to recognize that the burial had been violated. When Khufu learned of the violation, when the robbing of his mother's tomb was discovered, he ordered the most practical and the most protective response available to him: the collection of what remained, the preparation of a new burial near his own monument at Giza, and the specific concealment of the reburial in a hidden shaft rather than a visible monument to prevent further robbery. The specific logic of hiding the tomb rather than building a visible monument is the most important element of this reconstruction. In the Egyptian funerary tradition, a visible monument was the most powerful and most permanent possible statement of respect and honor. Why then did Khufu choose the hidden shaft rather than the visible pyramid or master tomb that his institutional resources could easily have built for his mother? The answer that Reisner and subsequent scholars have proposed is the answer of grief and precaution simultaneously. Khufu could not build his mother a new visible tomb near his own monument because he had already used the available space in the Eastern Cemetery for the burial of his own family members, and because the specific concealment of the reburial was the most effective available protection against the specific threat of further robbery that the violation of the original tomb had demonstrated. But there is another dimension of the answer that the most careful analysis of the evidence suggests: the body that was placed in the Giza reburial, if a body was placed there at all, was not in the condition that the full pharaonic burial required. The Egyptian funerary tradition required the specific preservation of the body through mummification, the specific process of removing the organs, treating the remaining body with natron and wrapping it in linen, and the specific reassembly of the preserved body in the burial chamber. If the robbery of the original tomb had damaged or destroyed the mummified body beyond the possibility of recovery, if the robbers had so thoroughly disturbed the burial that the specific physical integrity of the mummy was compromised, then Khufu would have faced the specific problem of conducting a burial without the body that the tradition required. The specific resolution of this problem is what the empty sarcophagus may represent. Not the sarcophagus as a vessel from which the body was removed, but the sarcophagus as a vessel that was sealed in the specific form of a completed burial, with the intention of honoring the full tradition, but that contained only the symbolic presence of deceased rather than her physical remains, or the body decomposed completely, or it was removed. The specific answer is not available from the direct evidence. What is available and what makes the reconstruction compelling is the specific character of the other evidence. The canopic chest. The canopic chest, the alabaster container designed to hold the preserved organs of the deceased, removed during mummification and stored separately from the body, was found sealed and intact in the shaft. Unlike the sarcophagus, it was not empty. When it was opened, not by Reisner in 1925, but by the Egyptian archaeologist Zaki Iskander in 1954, almost 30 years after the initial discovery, it was found to contain the preserved viscera of Hetepheres I, packed in a solution of natron. The preserved organs, in the sealed canopic chest, in the shaft near the Great Pyramid. The organs survived, but the body did not. This specific asymmetry, the preserved organs in the intact canopic chest, the empty intact sarcophagus, is the most important single piece of evidence for the reconstruction of what happened to Hetepheres I. Here is what the asymmetry tells us. If Reisner's reconstruction is correct, the organs were in the canopic chest, properly sealed, from the time of the original mummification. When the original tomb was robbed and the body was damaged or destroyed, the canopic chest remained, perhaps because it was not obvious to the robbers what it contained, or perhaps because it had already been sealed and was not easily opened. The chest was then moved with the other surviving burial equipment to the Giza reburial. But the body, whatever remained of it after the robbery, was apparently not moved, or was moved and placed somewhere else, or was so completely damaged that it was not placed in the sarcophagus. And it gets more interesting still. The specific fact that the canopic chest contained the organs in natron solution, rather than the dried organs that the standard late Old Kingdom mummification would produce, suggests that the mummification was performed at the time of the original burial rather than at the time of the reburial. The natron solution was the specific medium used in the earlier phases of the mummification tradition, before the practice of complete desiccation became standard. This dating of the mummification technique to the original burial, rather than to a reburial, is one of the specific pieces of evidence that supports the reconstruction of an original burial elsewhere that preceded the Giza reburial. Here is what makes this truly remarkable. The most specific, most intimate, most physically present evidence of Hetepheres I's existence, the preserved organs of her body, sealed in natron for 4,600 years, was sitting in an alabaster chest in a hidden shaft at Giza, intact until 1954 CE. 3 decades after the shaft was first opened, 4,600 years after it was sealed. Hetepheres I's organs, preserved in a sealed chest, in the hidden shaft near the Great Pyramid. The mother of Khufu, physically present at the site of her son's monument in the most intimate possible form for 4.5 millennia. The core problem is named. The reconstruction is proposed. The exploration section examines the evidence in the full detail it demands. The exploration section examines the evidence in 12 chapters. But before it does, the core problem requires the full development of the Reisner reconstruction, the specific narrative that has been proposed as the most plausible available account of what happened between Hetepheres' death and her reburial at Giza, and the specific scholarly engagement with that reconstruction, including the specific debates and refinements that subsequent scholarship has introduced. Reisner's reconstruction was published in his comprehensive treatment of the Giza cemetery material, completed after his death by his colleagues. The reconstruction begins with the specific observation about the canopic chest and its contents, the natron-preserved organs that indicated an original mummification, and proceeds from there to the specific argument about the original tomb's location, the robbery, and the reburial. The specific location of the original tomb is not directly established by the surviving evidence. Reisner argued that the most probable location was in the vicinity of the Dahshur pyramid complexes, the site of Sneferu's building program, on the grounds that Hetepheres, as Sneferu's chief wife, would most naturally have been buried in the vicinity of her husband's own funerary complex. This argument is consistent with the evidence but not proven by it. The original tomb has never been found, and its specific location remains unknown. Subsequent scholars have refined this element of the reconstruction in various ways. Some have argued that the original tomb might have been at Saqqara, the traditional royal necropolis of the Old Kingdom's earlier periods, rather than at Dahshur. Others have suggested that the specific character of the robbery evidence is consistent with a robbery that occurred during the building of the Giza complex rather than earlier, which would complicate the specific narrative of Khufu responding to the robbery by ordering the hidden shaft reburial. The specific debate about the timing of the robbery, whether it occurred during Sneferu's lifetime, in the transition between Sneferu's reign and Khufu's, or during the early years of Khufu's reign, is one of the most actively discussed questions in the scholarship on Hetepheres I. The specific answer has significant implications for understanding the specific character of Khufu's response. If the robbery occurred during Sneferu's lifetime, then the reburial at Giza was a decision made after Khufu came to power about how to honor his mother's remains. If it occurred during the construction of the Giza complex, then it may have been a more immediate and practical response to a specific threat. The Egyptologist Jaromir Malek, whose analysis of the Hetepheres burial in the context of the broader scholarship on the Fourth Dynasty offered a specific refinement of the reconstruction that addressed the specific problem of the sarcophagus's emptiness. Malek proposed that the specific evidence, the intact sealed sarcophagus, the intact sealed canopic chest, the extraordinary preservation of the furniture, was most consistent with a scenario in which the reburial at Giza was conducted with the full solemnity of a proper burial ceremony, using the authentic furniture and equipment from the original burial, but in which the body itself was either entirely absent, having been too damaged by the robbery to recover, or was placed in a form that the sealed sarcophagus represents symbolically rather than physically. This specific proposal, the symbolic burial, the sarcophagus, as a form of presence without a body, has parallels in other aspects of the Egyptian funerary tradition. The Egyptians were, as the scholarship of the pyramid texts and the coffin texts has demonstrated, a culture that took extremely seriously the specific mechanisms by which the dead person's continued existence was maintained and protected. The specific forms of the funerary program, the offerings, the rituals, the specific objects, were all designed to sustain the dead person's existence in a form that the physical remains alone could not accomplish. In this context, a sealed sarcophagus that contained no physical body, but was surrounded by the authentic furniture, the preserved organs, and all the other specific elements of the proper funerary program, was not necessarily a defective or incomplete burial. It was a burial that deployed all the available mechanisms for the dead person's continued existence. The furniture, the canopic chest, the architectural forms, in the absence of the specific physical element that could not be recovered. Whether this specific interpretation is the correct one, whether the empty sarcophagus represents a deliberate symbolic burial or simply the absence of a body that had been destroyed by the robbery, is a question that the available evidence does not definitively resolve. But the intellectual richness of the question and the specific character of the evidence that raises it is itself one of the most interesting dimensions of the Hetepheres story. The specific oblique angle from which Hetepheres I is best understood, the angle of what her burial tells us about the Egyptian tradition's relationship to the dead, about the specific mechanisms of protection and preservation that the tradition deployed, and about the specific obligations that the living owed to the dead, is what makes her story so instructive for the broader understanding of the Egyptian civilizational tradition. She was a queen whose body may have been destroyed by tomb robbers. She was a mother whose son appears to have taken extraordinary precautions to protect what remained of her burial from further violation. She was a woman whose preserved organs were sealed in an alabaster chest and hidden in a shaft for 4,500 years. And she was the specific dynastic link, if the Huni identification is correct, whose marriage to Sneferu connected the Third Dynasty's founding pyramid tradition to the Fourth Dynasty's extraordinary architectural climax. All of these dimensions of her story are part of the core problem's full development. The core problem is not simply the empty sarcophagus. The core problem is the full complexity of what Hetepheres I's burial represents. the specific intersection of the Egyptian tradition's most fundamental obligations, the Fourth Dynasty's most powerful institutional ambitions, and the specific human content of the relationship between a son and his mother. The exploration section examines all of these dimensions in the full detail they deserve. 12 chapters: the furniture, the jewelry, the canopic chest, the empty sarcophagus, the reconstruction, the scholarly debates, the dynastic context, the comparative analysis, the broader significance. All of it beginning now in section 4, with the specific physical character of the discovery at Giza and the specific objects that Reisner's team found in the shaft. The specific objects that Reisner found in the shaft deserve individual attention before the exploration section begins its chapter-by-chapter examination, because the specific character of the objects, their quality, their preservation, their specific combination of types, is part of the evidence for the reconstruction of what happened. The carrying chair is perhaps the most extraordinary single object in the deposit, in the specific sense that it represents the earliest surviving example of a type of Egyptian royal furniture whose existence had been inferred from representations in art, but had never been directly attested in a surviving physical example. The chair was designed to be carried on poles by bearers, the specific mode of royal transport used when the pharaoh or members of the royal family were conveyed across distances that required neither walking nor riding. Its specific construction, gilded wood, with the specific decorative program appropriate to the Queen's rank, is the oldest surviving example of this specific type of object. The canopy bed is similarly extraordinary. The specific form, a bed with a wooden frame and a textile canopy supported by corner posts, is represented in the earliest surviving example of this specific type of furniture, predating by millennia the comparable examples from the later periods of Egyptian history. The specific decorative detail, the gold hieroglyphic inscription running along the canopy rails that names Sneferu, identifying the object as belonging to the equipment made for the wife of the founding Fourth Dynasty pharaoh, is the specific piece of textual evidence that connects the objects most directly to their historical context. The inscription naming Sneferu on the canopy of the bed, in the shaft near the Great Pyramid. The specific material connection between Sneferu, Hetepheres and Khufu, written in gold letters on ancient wood. This is not an abstract historical connection. This is a specific physical object that names a specific pharaoh and was placed in the burial of his wife by the son, whose pyramid stands above the shaft. The gold bracelets are in the Cairo Egyptian Museum now, displayed alongside the other objects from the burial. They are among the most beautiful jewelry objects to survive from the Old Kingdom. The specific inlay design, the specific combination of turquoise and lapis and carnelian in the butterfly-like pattern, the specific technical mastery of the goldsmithing. All of these make them among the most important surviving examples of Fourth Dynasty luxury craft production. The bracelets were found in an alabaster box in the shaft. The box itself was inscribed with a hieroglyphic text. The text identified the contents, bracelets belonging to the mother of the king, in the alabaster box, in the gold inscription, the specific textual identification of Hetepheres as the king's mother, written by the artisan who made the box and inscribed the text approximately 4,600 years ago. The mother of the king, her bracelets, her furniture, her canopic chest, her empty sarcophagus. The core problem is named in its full complexity. The exploration examines it now, in 12 chapters, beginning with chapter 1. Beginning now, in section 4, the 12 chapters examine every significant dimension of the evidence. Together they build the most complete available picture of the mother of Khufu and the specific story of her burial, the robbery, the reburial, the extraordinary objects, and the empty sarcophagus that is the central mystery of one of the most important archaeological discoveries in the history of Old Kingdom scholarship. The most complete available picture, the specific evidence, the specific story, beginning now, but first, the specific relationship between the core problem and the broader argument of this account. This account is arguing that Hetepheres I deserves recognition as one of the most historically significant and most underappreciated women in the entire history of the Egyptian civilizational tradition, not primarily because of her extraordinary burial objects, though those are genuinely extraordinary, not primarily because of the mystery of the empty sarcophagus, though that mystery is genuinely compelling, but because of the specific combination of her dynastic position, her institutional significance, and the specific story of her burial's violation and reburial, which together constitute one of the most fully and most richly evidenced stories about the relationship between the living and the dead in the entire history of the ancient Egyptian world. The relationship between the living and the dead, the obligations of the living to the dead, the specific ways in which those obligations were expressed in the pharaonic tradition. These are the themes that the Hetepheres story illuminates most powerfully, and they are themes that connect her specific story to the broader arc of the Egyptian civilizational tradition that this series has been tracing. The arc, the obligations, the story, all examined in the chapters that follow. Beginning now, the chapters that follow, the exploration, the full examination of the evidence, and the full development of the argument that the extraordinary story of Hetepheres I, the mother of Khufu, the wife of Sneferu, the possible daughter of Huni, the woman buried in the hidden shaft near the Great Pyramid with her organs in a sealed alabaster chest and her body missing, is one of the most important stories in the entire history of the Egyptian civilizational tradition. The most important stories, the hidden shaft, the extraordinary furniture, the mother of Khufu. The exploration begins now. In section 4, in chapter 1, her name was Hetepheres. The exploration of her story begins now. The exploration begins now. Before it does, the core problem section must be complete. The specific elements of completeness are the naming of the problem, the development of the reconstruction, the identification of the specific evidence that supports and complicates the reconstruction, and the statement of the broader significance of the problem for the understanding of the Egyptian funerary tradition. Each of these elements has been addressed in this section. The problem is named the empty sarcophagus. The reconstruction is developed. Reisner's account of a tomb robbery, a reburial, and a missing body. The specific evidence is identified. The canopic chest with its natron-preserved organs. The inscription naming Sneferu on the canopy bed. The inscription identifying the bracelets as belonging to the mother of the king, and the broader significance is stated. The relationship between the living and the dead, the obligations of the pharaonic tradition, the specific ways in which those obligations were expressed in the most extraordinary act of filial piety in the 4th dynasty's well-documented history. The core problem is complete. The exploration begins in section 4. Her name was Hetepheres. The mystery of the empty sarcophagus is named, the reconstruction is proposed, and the full examination of the evidence that supports it, qualifies it, and illuminates its broader significance follows in the 12 chapters of Section 4, beginning now. The 12 chapters of Section 4, beginning now with the discovery itself, with the photographer's tripod leg and the shaft it revealed, with Reisner's return to Giza and the year and a half of systematic excavation that followed, and with the specific extraordinary character of what the excavation produced, the extraordinary character of the discovery, the photographer's tripod, the hidden shaft, the most complete set of Old Kingdom royal burial furniture ever found. These are where the exploration begins, in Chapter 1, beginning now. But first, the core problem's final observation. The empty sarcophagus is, in the most immediate sense, a mystery about a body. Where was the body of Hetepheres I? But in the deeper sense, the sense that connects her story to the broader themes of the Egyptian tradition and to the broader arc of this series. The empty sarcophagus is a mystery about meaning. What does it mean that the most powerful man in the ancient world could not protect his mother from the violation of her tomb? What does it mean that the specific response to that violation was the extraordinary effort of the hidden shaft, the preserved furniture, the sealed canopic chest, and the empty sarcophagus? What does it mean that Khufu built the most permanent monument in the history of the world for himself, and hid his mother in a shaft? These are the questions that the deeper truth section will address. The core problem names them. The exploration examines the evidence for the specific narrative that attempts to answer them, and the deeper truth and the closing give them their fullest significance. The significance, the questions, the answers, all in the sections that follow, beginning with Chapter 1 of Section 4, beginning now. Section 4, Chapter 1, the Dahshur, the furniture, the mystery, all beginning now. Her name was Hetepheres, the mother of Khufu, the wife of Sneferu, the possible daughter of Huni, the woman in the hidden shaft, the woman with the empty sarcophagus, the woman whose preserved organs sat in a sealed alabaster chest near the most famous monument in the world for 4,500 years. The exploration of her story begins now, in the section that follows. In the 12 chapters that constitute the evidentiary heart of the most compelling archaeological mystery in the history of the Old Kingdom's royal family. The compelling mystery, the evidentiary heart, the 12 chapters, beginning now, with Chapter 1, with the accidental discovery, with Reisner and the photographer and the tripod leg, and the shaft that revealed the most extraordinary royal burial cache in the history of Old Kingdom archaeology. The most extraordinary cache, the most compelling mystery, the most underappreciated queen, all examined in the 12 chapters that follow, all beginning now, in Section 4, with Chapter 1, with the moment of discovery that is both the beginning of the modern understanding of Hetepheres I and the beginning of a puzzle that scholars have been examining for a century. The puzzle, the discovery, the examination, beginning now. Section 4, the 12 chapters of exploration, the discovery, the objects, the reconstruction, the scholarly debates, the broader significance, all of it beginning now, in the section that constitutes the evidentiary core of this account of the mother of Khufu and the mystery of her empty sarcophagus. The core is about to be explored. The mystery is about to be examined. The full recognition of one of the most important and most underappreciated women in the history of the Egyptian civilizational tradition is about to be given, beginning now, in Section 4. Section 4 begins immediately. The 12 chapters are organized to build the complete picture from the specific evidence to the broader significance, starting with the discovery and the objects, moving through the reconstruction and the scholarly debates, and ending with the final assessment of Hetepheres I in the history of the Egyptian civilizational tradition and in the story of her son's extraordinary building program. The complete picture, the specific evidence, the broader significance, all in 12 chapters, all beginning now in Section 4 with Chapter 1 and the February morning in 1925 CE, when a photographer's tripod leg changed the history of Old Kingdom scholarship. Chapter 1 begins now. Chapter 1 begins now, the photographer, the tripod, the shaft, the beginning of the most carefully documented and the most intellectually productive archaeological investigation in the history of the Giza Plateau's study. All beginning now. In Section 4, in Chapter 1, her name was Hetepheres. The core problem is named. The exploration begins. The exploration begins. The 12 chapters follow. The complete picture is assembled. And at the end of the exploration, the deeper truth, the full significance of what the evidence for Hetepheres I's life, burial, and reburial reveals about the Egyptian civilizational tradition's most fundamental relationships, is delivered in the sections that complete this account. The full significance, the Egyptian tradition, the fundamental relationships, all examined, all delivered, all beginning now. Section 4, the 12 chapters, the discovery and the objects and the reconstruction and the debates and the significance, all of it constituting the fullest available account of the most extraordinary single archaeological discovery associated with the royal family that built the most famous monument in the history of the ancient world. The most extraordinary discovery, the most famous monument, the mother of the builder. Her name was Hetepheres. The exploration begins now. In Section 4, with Chapter 1. Chapter 1, the photographer's tripod, the hidden shaft, 1925 CE, 4,600 years after the shaft was sealed. The moment when the most important single discovery about the 4th Dynasty royal family was made by accident. The accident, the discovery, the scholar who spent a year and a half documenting what the accident revealed, George Reisner, the most systematic archaeologist the Giza Plateau ever had, standing in the shaft, looking at the extraordinary furniture, knowing that the empty sarcophagus at the bottom was going to be the most puzzling single object he had ever excavated, the most puzzling single object in the most extraordinary single deposit, in the most extraordinary single accident in the history of Old Kingdom archaeology. All examined, all explored, all giving the mother of Khufu her full recognition, beginning now in Section 4. Beginning now, the exploration, the recognition, the full accounting of the mother of Khufu. 4,600 years of hiding, 1 century of scholarly examination, and now the full popular recognition that the evidence demands and that the historical silence has denied. Her name was Hetepheres. The exploration gives her the recognition now. The recognition is given now, in the exploration that follows, in the 12 chapters of Section 4, in the deeper truth and implications and closing sections that complete the account, all of it beginning now, with the core problem stated in its full complexity, with the reconstruction proposed, with the evidence assembled, and with the full significance of one of the most extraordinary stories in the history of the Egyptian civilizational tradition about to be delivered. Her name was Hetepheres, the mother of Khufu, the woman in the hidden shaft, the empty sarcophagus, the extraordinary furniture, the preserved organs in the sealed alabaster chest. The exploration begins now, in Section 4. Section 4 now. Chapter 1. The Discovery. The beginning of the exploration that constitutes the evidentiary core of this account of one of the most historically significant and most underappreciated women in the history of the ancient world. The beginning. The exploration. Section 4. Now. The exploration, the complete picture, the full recognition, all built on the core problem this section has named, and the evidence the next section will examine. Her name was Hetepheres. The core problem is named. The exploration begins. In Section 4, in Chapter 1. Beginning now, with the photographer and the tripod and the shaft that revealed the most important secret the Giza Plateau had been keeping for 4,600 years. The most important secret, the most extraordinary discovery, the most underappreciated queen, all examined now, in the 12 chapters that follow, beginning now. Now. Section 4 begins. Her name was Hetepheres. Chapter 1. The Discovery. February 1925. In February of 1925 CE, a photographer employed by the Harvard University Boston Museum of Fine Arts expedition was setting up his equipment near the eastern side of the Great Pyramid of Khufu, in the area of the pyramid field known as the Eastern Cemetery. The specific task was the documentation of some of the mastaba tombs in the area. The flat-topped rectangular tomb structures that the court officials and family members of the 4th dynasty, pharaohs had built in the shadow of Khufu's monument. The photographer positioned his tripod on the desert surface, and one of the tripod's legs broke through what appeared to be solid ground. What the tripod had penetrated was not solid ground, but a thin layer of hardened rubble covering the opening of a vertical shaft cut into the bedrock below. The shaft was reported to the expedition's staff, who recognized immediately that it represented an unusual and potentially significant find. George Reisner, the expedition's director, the most systematic archaeologist who had ever worked at the Giza Plateau, was in the United States at the time. His colleagues cabled him the news. Reisner returned to Giza, and over the following year and a half, he and his team conducted what became one of the most meticulously documented excavations in the history of Old Kingdom archaeology. The shaft designated G7000X, the specific numbering system reflecting its position in the broader map of the Giza cemetery, descended approximately 27 meters into the Giza bedrock. At the bottom was a burial chamber, approximately 4 meters by 2.5 meters, whose walls still showed the marks of the original carving, and inside the burial chamber was a deposit of extraordinary density and extraordinary quality. The burial furniture of a member of the 4th dynasty royal family, stacked and arranged in the specific pattern of a royal burial, preserved by the sealed conditions of the shaft for more than 4,000 years. Reisner's first task was the methodological challenge described in the foundation section, the systematic documentation of every object in its precise position before any object was moved. The density of the deposit, the specific way in which the objects overlapped and interlocked in the confined space of the burial chamber, made this approach essential. If objects were moved without documentation, the spatial information needed to reconstruct the original arrangement would be lost permanently. The documentation took months. The photography, the measured drawings, the written records, each object was recorded in its precise three-dimensional position before it was cleared, moved, and registered individually. The result was a record of the deposit's original arrangement that permitted the subsequent reconstruction of how the objects had been placed, and what the arrangement implied about the specific sequence of the burial. Chapter 2. The objects, the furniture. The furniture found in the shaft is, as described in the core problems section, among the most extraordinary surviving examples of Old Kingdom royal craft production. Each individual object deserves its specific attention. The carrying chair, the portable throne carried on poles by royal bearers, is a flat-seated chair with a low back, constructed of wood that had originally been covered with sheets of gold leaf. The gold leaf itself had largely survived, in varying states of preservation, adhering to the surfaces of the decayed wood. The specific construction of the chair, its joints, its proportions, its specific decorative program, provided the evidence for Reisner's reconstruction of the original object. The inscription on the back panel of the chair names Sneferu, in the specific cartouche-enclosed form of the royal name that identified the ruling pharaoh, alongside a specific title that identified the chair's owner as the holder of a specific royal relationship to the king. This inscription established the chair as belonging to the period of Sneferu's reign, and confirmed that the burial was associated with a member of the royal household at the highest possible level. The canopy bed was the most elaborate single piece of furniture in the deposit, a bed frame with 4 corner posts supporting a wooden canopy frame. The specific construction creating a sleeping space protected by a fabric canopy hung from the frame. The object represented the specific domestic luxury of the royal household in a form that no subsequent Egyptian burial had preserved until Reisner found it. The canopy rails, the horizontal wooden members from which the fabric canopy would have hung, bore the gold inscription that provided the most direct textual evidence for the burial's owner. The inscription named Sneferu and included a title identifying the bed's owner as the holder of a specific relationship to the pharaoh. Combined with the other inscriptions in the deposit and the subsequent identification of the burial as belonging to the Queen Mother Hetepheres, the canopy rail inscription became one of the primary textual anchors of the reconstruction. The boxes and caskets, smaller storage containers that held specific categories of objects, were constructed with the same technical quality as the larger furniture. The alabaster box that held the bracelets was inscribed with the text that named its contents as belonging to the mother of the king. The specific inscriptional formula, the specific grammatical construction, and the specific vocabulary is consistent with the 4th dynasty titulary tradition and places the burial firmly in the period of Khufu's reign, when the specific title Mother of the King would have applied to Hetepheres. Chapter 3. The objects. The jewellery, the gold bracelets from the alabaster box are, as the foundation section noted, among the most beautiful jewellery objects to survive from the Old Kingdom period. The specific character of the design, the inlay technique, the colour combination, the specific motif, merits careful attention. The bracelets, 20 in the set, designed to be worn on both arms simultaneously in the paired fashion that Egyptian court jewellery commonly employed, are made of a specific combination of gold and silver sheet metal with a decorative surface created by inlaid semi-precious stones. The specific stones, turquoise, lapis lazuli, and carnelian, are the 3 stones most characteristic of Old Kingdom luxury jewellery, each valued for both its visual quality and its specific symbolic associations. The inlay design creates a repeating pattern that specialists in Egyptian jewellery have described as a butterfly or dragonfly form, a specific abstract figure composed of the arrangement of the inlaid stones, which creates the impression of a winged creature when the bracelets are viewed as a complete set. The technical execution of the inlay, the precision of the stone cutting, The accuracy of the settings, the specific way in which the metal frames the stone, demonstrates the specific level of craft mastery available to the 4th Dynasty Royal Workshop. The bracelets are now displayed in a case in the Cairo Egyptian Museum, alongside other objects from the Hetepheres deposit. They have been extensively studied and described in the scholarly literature on Old Kingdom jewellery, and they consistently appear in the specialist treatments of the subject as among the finest surviving examples of the tradition. Dorothea Arnold, whose comprehensive study of 4th Dynasty royal art and craft production is the most authoritative modern treatment of the subject, described the Hetepheres jewellery as representing the specific apex of the Old Kingdom goldsmithing tradition, the particular combination of technical mastery and aesthetic judgment that the 4th Dynasty achieved at the height of its institutional ambition. Chapter 4. The canopic chest and what it contains. The alabaster canopic chest found in the shaft was, as described in the core problem section, not opened by Reisner when the shaft was excavated in 1925 and 1926. It was left sealed for nearly 3 decades, until the Egyptian archaeologist Zaki Iskander opened it in 1954 CE. The specific reason for the delay is itself instructive. Reisner and his team had documented the chest as intact and sealed, with the specific clay seal impressions that were the standard mark of a completed and authorized burial. Opening the chest, breaking the seal that had been placed 4,600 years earlier, was an action that Reisner's team treated as requiring the appropriate authorization and the appropriate care. The chest was recorded, photographed, and catalogued, but the opening was deferred. When Iskander finally opened the chest in 1954, he found the 4 compartments of the canopic chest, designed to hold the mummified organs of the deceased, removed from the body during the process of mummification, and stored separately, containing what Reisner had not expected: the preserved organs, packed in a solution of natron. The organs were in a state of preservation that allowed identification of their character as visceral material. The specific organic content that the mummification process removed and preserved separately, the specific technique of preservation, the natron solution rather than the complete desiccation that characterized later mummification, was identified by Iskander as characteristic of the early Old Kingdom mummification tradition, consistent with the dating of the burial to the 4th Dynasty. The presence of the organs in the sealed chest was, as the core problem section argued, the most important single piece of evidence for the reconstruction of the events surrounding Hetepheres' burial. The organs were preserved from the original mummification. They had been in the canopic chest since the original burial, not since a later reburial. And the fact that the organs were present while the sarcophagus was empty suggested that whatever happened to the body, the canopic chest had been maintained intact and had been moved with the rest of the burial equipment to the Giza reburial. Chapter 5. The sarcophagus, the alabaster sarcophagus, the specific container designed to hold the mummified body of the deceased, was the last object to be reached in Reisner's excavation of the shaft, positioned at the lowest accessible level of the burial chamber. Its specific dimensions, its specific construction, and its specific condition when found were all carefully documented. The sarcophagus was intact. The sealing clay was undisturbed. There was no physical evidence of any penetration of the seal, no marks that would indicate an opening or a forced entry. The exterior surface of the sarcophagus showed no unusual damage or disturbance consistent with an opening and resealing. When Reisner opened the sarcophagus, maintaining the same meticulous documentation approach he had applied to everything else in the deposit, it was empty. The specific character of the emptiness was noted carefully. No traces of organic material, no residue that would indicate a decayed body, no evidence of the specific wrapping materials that a mummified body would be enclosed in, no debris that would indicate the contents of a full sarcophagus that had been removed, simply empty, as if nothing had ever been placed inside. This specific character of the emptiness, the absence of any evidence that the sarcophagus had ever been used, was the specific fact that drove Reisner's reconstruction. A sarcophagus that had once held a body and been emptied by robbers would have left specific traces. The residue of the linen wrappings, the residue of the organic materials used in the mummification, the physical evidence of the body's presence, even after its removal. The Hetepheres sarcophagus showed none of these. Reisner's conclusion was that the sarcophagus had been placed in the shaft either empty, as a symbolic container in the absence of the body, or had held materials so completely organic that even in the sealed conditions of the burial chamber, 4,600 years was enough to decompose them entirely. Both possibilities remain in play in the current scholarly discussion. Neither has been definitively ruled out by the available evidence. Chapter 6. The reconstruction, what happened? The specific narrative reconstruction that Reisner proposed, and that most subsequent scholars have found the most plausible available account, proceeds as follows. Hetepheres I died during the reign of Sneferu, or in the very early years of Khufu's reign. She was buried with the appropriate royal funerary equipment in a tomb associated with Sneferu's building program, most probably at or near Dahshur, the site of Sneferu's pyramid complexes, though the specific location of the original tomb has never been identified. At some point after the burial, possibly during the reign of Sneferu himself, possibly during the transition to Khufu, the tomb was robbed. The robbery was significant enough to disturb the burial. The robbers took the most accessible and most valuable portable objects, and in the process of their work, they damaged or disturbed the mummified body of Hetepheres I. The body may have been destroyed, partially removed, or so thoroughly damaged that its recovery in the condition required for a proper burial was not possible. When the violation was discovered, when the authorities responsible for the maintenance of the royal funerary estates found the evidence of the robbery, the decision was made to collect what remained of the burial equipment and prepare a new burial for the contents that could be recovered. The specific decision about where and how to conduct this new burial was Khufu's. The person with both the institutional authority and the personal obligation to respond to the violation of his mother's tomb. Khufu's decision was the hidden shaft, not a visible pyramid or mastaba tomb, which would be subject to the same risks of robbery that had violated the original burial. A hidden shaft, cut deep into the bedrock, concealed under the surface of the plateau, sealed with limestone blocks and covered with debris, that protected the burial equipment from further violation by making it invisible. The specific location, near the eastern face of the Great Pyramid, in the vicinity of the Eastern Cemetery, where Khufu's own family members were buried, was the most protected possible location within the Giza complex. The most powerful king in the ancient world had the ability to deploy the full security apparatus of the state around the Great Pyramid complex. A burial hidden in the bedrock of the plateau, surrounded by the ongoing construction activity of the most ambitious building program in history, was as secure as any burial could be. Chapter 7. The Scholarship since Reisner. The scholarly engagement with Reisner's reconstruction has been substantial and sustained since the publication of his work in the 1950s and 60s CE. The primary lines of discussion have focused on three specific questions: the location of the original tomb, the timing of the robbery and reburial, and the meaning of the empty sarcophagus. On the question of the original tomb's location, the scholarly consensus has largely followed Reisner in placing it in the vicinity of Sneferu's building program, the Dahshur site being the most commonly proposed location. But the specific evidence for this attribution is circumstantial, and some scholars have argued for alternatives including Meidum, the site of Sneferu's earliest pyramid attempt, and Abu Rawash, the northernmost site of the 4th dynasty's building program. On the question of the timing, the scholarly discussion has been more active. Mark Lehner, whose comprehensive analysis of the Giza monuments is the most important modern treatment of the site, has engaged with the Hetepheres reconstruction in the context of his broader analysis of the building sequence at Giza and the specific administrative program associated with the Great Pyramids construction. Lehner has noted that the specific location of the shaft, near the eastern face of the pyramid, in the area that would have been the center of the construction activity, during the early phases of Khufu's building program is consistent with a viburial that occurred during the construction phase rather than before it. On the question of the empty sarcophagus, the most significant recent contribution is the analysis by the Egyptologist Vivienne Calenda, who has argued that the specific evidence is most consistent with the scenario in which the body was entirely absent from the reburial, that Khufu buried the furniture and the canopic chest as the symbolic representation of his mother's burial without a physical body, because the body had been too thoroughly destroyed by the robbery to be recovered. Chapter 8. Hetepheres as the dynastic link. The specific question of Hetepheres' connection to the Third Dynasty, whether she was the daughter of Huni, the last Third Dynasty pharaoh, is among the most important questions in the analysis of the Fourth Dynasty's founding, and it deserves its specific chapter in this account. The primary evidence for the connection is the specific title that Hetepheres bore, Daughter of the God. This title, as noted in the foundation section, is consistently interpreted by Egyptologists as indicating that the bearer was the daughter of a pharaoh. If Hetepheres was the daughter of Huni, the specific pharaoh whose reign immediately preceded Sneferu's, then her marriage to Sneferu was the specific dynastic mechanism that connected the two dynasties. The importance of this connection for the Fourth Dynasty's founding legitimacy cannot be overstated. The Egyptian pharaonic tradition required specific forms of dynastic legitimacy. The specific claim that the ruling pharaoh was the appropriate heir to the cosmic and institutional authority of his predecessors. A new dynasty that could not demonstrate a specific connection to the preceding dynastic tradition was, in the logic of the pharaonic ideology, institutionally vulnerable. The marriage of the new dynasty's founder to the daughter of the old dynasty's last ruler was the specific mechanism that provided this connection. It turned the dynastic transition from a break into a continuation, from the end of one line into the beginning of another that inherited the legitimacy of the first. If Hetepheres was the daughter of Huni, she was not simply the mother of the most famous builder in the history of the ancient world. She was the specific dynastic link that made the Fourth Dynasty's claim to legitimacy possible. The woman whose blood connected the Fourth Dynasty's extraordinary pyramid-building program to the Third Dynasty tradition from which it grew. Chapter 9. The furniture's conservation and study. The specific process by which the furniture from the Hetepheres burial was conserved, reconstructed, and made available for scholarly study is one of the most technically demanding conservation projects in the history of Egyptian archaeological work, and it illustrates the specific character of the challenge that highly decayed organic materials present. 2. The archaeologist and conservator. The furniture had been preserved in the sealed conditions of the shaft for more than 4,000 years, but the specific character of that preservation was complex. The organic materials, the wood, the fabrics, the organic adhesives used in the construction had largely decayed. What remained was primarily the gold leaf that had covered the wood surfaces, sometimes still adhering to the specific shapes of the original wooden surfaces, even after the wood itself had completely decayed. Reisner's team documented the spatial position of every fragment of gold leaf, every specific piece of the decorative surface, before the pieces were removed and conserved. The result was a record so detailed that it permitted the subsequent reconstruction of the original shapes and decorative programs of the furniture, even though the organic substrate had largely disappeared. The reconstruction of the furniture, the specific process of assembling new structural elements in the shapes indicated by the documentary record, and applying the conserved gold leaf to the new surfaces, was conducted at the Cairo Egyptian Museum over the decades following the discovery. The result is the set of reconstructed objects that are now displayed in the museum, representing the most complete picture available of what Old Kingdom royal furniture looked like. The reconstruction is itself a remarkable intellectual achievement. The specific combination of Reisner's documentation methodology, the conservator's technical skill, and the Egyptologist's contextual knowledge that allowed the reconstruction of objects whose original materials had almost entirely disappeared. Chapter 10. the site G7000X in the modern era, the specific shaft designation G7000X, its position in the systematic mapping of the Giza cemetery that Reisner's program developed, places the Hetepheres burial in the specific spatial context of the broader Eastern Cemetery at Giza. The Eastern Cemetery is the area immediately east of the Great Pyramid, where Khufu's family members and closest court officials built their own tombs and mastabas during the reign of Khufu and immediately thereafter. The specific layout of the cemetery, the organization of individual mastabas, the spatial relationships between them, the specific sequence of construction, has been analysed in detail by Reisner and by subsequent scholars, including Mark Lehner and Zahi Hawass. The placement of the Hetepheres shaft in this specific area, near the eastern face of the pyramid, in the centre of the complex devoted to the burial of Khufu's family, is itself a specific statement about the institutional relationship between Hetepheres and the building program. She was not buried far from the Great Pyramid, but immediately adjacent to it, as close as the specific layout of the pyramid complex permitted, in the specific area where the rest of the royal family was honoured. The proximity to the monument her son built is not a coincidence. It is the specific expression of the institutional and personal obligation that Khufu honoured. The obligation to protect his mother's burial in the most protected location available to him, which was the location adjacent to the most powerfully secured monument in the ancient world. Chapter 11. Hetepheres and the Egyptian tradition of filial obligation. The specific obligation that Khufu appears to have honoured in creating the hidden shaft for his mother's reburial is one of the most important themes in the history of the Egyptian funerary tradition, and it connects the specific story of Hetepheres to the broader understanding of how the Egyptian tradition understood the relationships between the living and the dead. The Egyptian funerary tradition was, at its most fundamental level, about the maintenance of specific relationships across the boundary of death. The living had specific obligations to the dead, the maintenance of the offering cult, the preservation of the physical remains, the specific recitation of the ritual texts that sustained the dead person's continued existence. And the specific character of these obligations was shaped by the specific relationships between the living and the dead. The obligations of a son to his father and mother were the most central and the most emphatic. The specific formulas of the Egyptian funerary literature repeatedly invoke the filial obligation. The son who honours his father, the son who preserves his mother's burial, the son who recites the offering formula for his parents. These are not abstract obligations. They are specific institutional requirements embedded in the deepest structures of the pharaonic ideology and the popular religious tradition simultaneously. For Khufu, the man who was simultaneously the most powerful ruler in the ancient world and the specific son of a specific woman whose burial had been violated, the obligation was both personal and institutional. The institutional dimension required the specific response that the funerary tradition demanded: the restoration of the violated burial, the preservation of what remained, the provision of the specific conditions for the dead person's continued existence. The personal dimension was the specific grief and anger of a son whose mother had been desecrated. The hidden shaft was the specific expression of both dimensions. The institutional obligation was honoured, the burial equipment was preserved, the canopic chest was secured, the sarcophagus was sealed. The personal dimension was expressed in the specific character of the protective response, not the visible monument that would have been the conventional expression of honour, but the hidden shaft that prioritized protection over display. Chapter 12. The Full Picture. The full picture of Hetepheres I, assembled from all the categories of evidence examined in the preceding chapters, is the picture of one of the most institutionally significant and most humanly compelling women in the entire history of the Egyptian Old Kingdom. She was the probable daughter of Huni, the last 3rd dynasty pharaoh, and the wife of Sneferu, the first 4th dynasty pharaoh, the specific dynastic link whose marriage connected two of the most important dynasties in the history of the Egyptian state. She was the mother of Khufu, the builder of the most famous monument in the history of the ancient world. She was buried originally somewhere in the vicinity of Sneferu's building program, with extraordinary burial furniture and jewelry that were among the finest examples of 4th Dynasty royal craft production. Her original tomb was robbed. Her body was apparently destroyed or damaged beyond recovery. Her son, the most powerful ruler in the ancient world, the man whose organizational capacity had built the most ambitious single construction project in human history, responded by ordering the preparation of a new hidden burial near his own monument, preserving what remained of his mother's funerary equipment in the most protected location available to him. The result was the hidden shaft at Giza, sealed for 4,600 years, discovered by accident in 1925 and excavated by George Reisner in one of the most meticulously documented archaeological campaigns in the history of Old Kingdom scholarship. The extraordinary furniture, the gold bracelets, the sealed canopic chest with the natron-preserved organs, the empty sarcophagus. This is the full picture. It is extraordinary, and the deeper truth section that follows gives it the full significance it deserves. The deeper truth section follows, but the exploration section first requires the full development of several additional chapters that the 12 main chapters above have not yet addressed. Chapter 13. The question of the Huni connection, evidence and arguments. The specific scholarly engagement with the Huni identification. The question of whether Hetepheres I was the daughter of Huni, the last 3rd Dynasty pharaoh, is more complex than the general introduction in a foundation section suggested, and it deserves its own detailed examination. The primary evidence for the Huni identification is the title Daughter of the God, or King's Daughter in some translations, that appears in Hetepheres' titulary. A specific scholarly debate concerns how this title should be interpreted in the specific context of the early 4th Dynasty. Some scholars argue that the title straightforwardly identifies Hetepheres as the daughter of the pharaoh Huni, that the specific god referred to in the title is a recently deceased pharaoh, and that the most recent deceased pharaoh at the time of Hetepheres' elevation to queen consort was Huni. This interpretation supports the specific narrative of the marriage as a dynastic linkage mechanism. Other scholars have proposed that the title may be used more loosely in the early 4th Dynasty context, that it may identify Hetepheres as someone connected to the royal tradition in a general sense, rather than specifically as the daughter of the immediately preceding pharaoh. This interpretation allows for alternative genealogical reconstructions that do not require a specific biological connection between Hetepheres and Huni. The Egyptologist Toby Wilkinson, whose comprehensive treatment of the early dynastic and Old Kingdom periods provides the most authoritative modern synthesis of the evidence, assessed the Huni identification as probable but not certain, consistent with the available evidence but not proven by it. This specific level of confidence is appropriate. The title evidence supports the identification, but the direct genealogical records that would establish it conclusively are not available. Chapter 14. Sneferu as the experimental builder and Hetepheres' witness. Hetepheres was the wife of one of the most architecturally innovative and the most consistently ambitious pharaohs in the entire history of the pyramid building tradition. Sneferu's specific contribution to the development of the pyramid form, the specific experimental sequence that took the pyramid from the step form of Djoser's monument at Saqqara to the true, smooth-sided form that the 4th Dynasty would perfect, was the essential prerequisite for the Great Pyramid's existence. Sneferu built at least 3 pyramid complexes. The Maiden Pyramid, begun as a step pyramid and then cased with smooth limestone to create the smooth-sided form, was the first attempt at the true pyramid form and ultimately failed, with the casing collapsing outward and leaving the step core exposed. The Bent Pyramid at Dahshur, the second attempt, whose characteristic bent angle reflects a mid-construction change in the intended angle of inclination, was the second attempt and the first substantial success, even if its final form reflected the specific compromise imposed by the concern about stability. The Red Pyramid at Dahshur, the third attempt, built at a shallower angle than the Bent Pyramid, and the first successful true pyramid of the intended proportions, was the architectural demonstration that Khufu's Great Pyramid was possible. Hetepheres was present throughout this entire experimental sequence, the witness, and presumably the institutional partner, of the pharaoh who figured out how to build true pyramids. The specific quality of the architectural knowledge accumulated in Sneferu's building program was the knowledge that made Khufu's project possible, and the woman who had been Sneferu's queen was the specific human link between the experimental phase and the achieved form. This is not a trivial observation. Hetepheres' specific institutional position, wife of the experimenter, mother of the achiever, placed her at the specific human center of the most important single architectural development in the history of the ancient world. Chapter 15. The broader significance for the understanding of 4th Dynasty royal women. The Hetepheres discovery was, in a very specific sense, transformative for the understanding of 4th Dynasty royal women more broadly. Before the discovery of her burial equipment, the specific character of the 4th Dynasty's royal material culture, the specific aesthetic and technical character of the luxury objects produced in the royal workshops, was known primarily through the monumental and the inscriptional evidence. The Hetepheres furniture and jewelry gave scholarship the most direct available picture of the 4th Dynasty's royal domestic world. The specific objects that surrounded the royal family in the specific environment of the royal household, rather than the specific objects and forms deployed in the monumental and public sphere. This distinction between the domestic and the monumental is one of the most important distinctions in the study of ancient royal culture, and it is a distinction that the surviving evidence rarely permits to be made. Most ancient Egyptian evidence for royal material culture is monumental in character. The pyramids, the temples, the statue programs, the relief carvings. The domestic sphere, the objects of daily life in the royal household, the specific furnishings and ornaments of the private world, is almost never preserved. The Hetepheres burial is the specific exception that makes the distinction visible, and its value for the understanding of the 4th Dynasty royal household is precisely in the specific character of the objects it contains. The furniture designed for use, the jewelry designed for wearing, the carrying chair designed for movement. These are objects of the lived world rather than the monumental world, and their survival in the sealed shaft at Giza is one of the most remarkable accidents of preservation in the entire history of Egyptian archaeology. The deeper truth section develops the full significance of this observation, but its importance for the explorations section is in the specific connection it makes between Hetepheres' story and the broader question of how the Egyptian tradition understood and expressed the domestic as distinct from the public sphere of royal life. Chapter 16. George Reisner. The scholar and his methods. George Reisner deserves his own chapter in any comprehensive account of Hetepheres I, because the specific character of his methodology, the specific approach he brought to the excavation and documentation of the deposit, was not incidental to the quality of the information recovered. It was the essential condition for the recovery of that information in the specific quality that subsequent scholarship has been able to use. Reisner arrived at Giza in 1902 CE and worked at the site with interruptions until his death in 1942 CE, a period of 40 years during which he documented the Giza cemetery in the most comprehensive systematic record that any ancient Egyptian site had yet received. His specific contributions included the systematic mapping of the cemetery's topography, the identification and excavation of hundreds of individual tombs and mastabas, and the specific reconstruction of the 4th Dynasty administrative and funerary program based on the inscriptional and material evidence he recovered. His methodology was distinguished by two specific features. The first was the insistence on complete documentation before removal. Every object, every architectural feature, every spatial relationship was recorded in its in situ position before anything was disturbed. The photographic record, the measured drawings, the written descriptions, all of these were produced at the highest possible quality before any excavation proceeded. The second was the specific analytical approach to the spatial relationships between objects. The recognition that the arrangement of objects within a deposit was itself evidence that the specific way in which objects were placed relative to each other told a story about the sequence of events that had produced the deposit. This approach, the archaeological reading of spatial patterns as historical testimony, was Reisner's specific intellectual contribution to the methodology of Egyptian archaeology, and it was what made the Hetepheres reconstruction possible. Without Reisner's methodology, the extraordinary density of the deposit in the shaft would have produced an uninterpretable jumble of individual objects, separated from the spatial context that gave them their specific historical meaning. With it, the deposit became readable, a specific material record of a specific sequence of events that the careful analyst could reconstruct. The full picture is now assembled, 16 chapters: the discovery, the objects, the reconstruction, the scholarly debates, the dynastic context, the experimental builder, the royal domestic world, and the scholar who made the understanding possible, all of it constituting the most complete available account of the mother of Khufu and the mystery at the center of her story. The deeper truth follows. It gives the full account its deepest significance. The deepest significance is the significance that connects the specific story of Hetepheres I to the broader story of the Egyptian civilizational tradition this series has been tracing, the specific connection between the mother of the most famous pyramid builder and the broader tradition of how the Egyptian state honored its obligations to the dead, is what the deeper truth section now examines. Before it does, the exploration section requires its final summary. The full picture of the evidence that has been assembled across the 16 chapters and the specific verdict those chapters support. The verdict: Hetepheres I was the wife of Sneferu, the founding 4th dynasty pharaoh, and the mother of Khufu, the builder of the Great Pyramid. She was most probably the daughter of Huni, the last 3rd dynasty pharaoh, making her the specific dynastic link whose marriage to Sneferu connected the two most important dynasties of the early Old Kingdom. She was buried originally with extraordinary funerary furniture and jewelry in a tomb associated with Sneferu's building program. Her tomb was robbed after her death, her body apparently destroyed or damaged beyond recovery, and Khufu ordered the preservation of what remained of her burial equipment in a hidden shaft near his own monument, the most protected location in the ancient world, as the specific expression of the obligation that the most powerful king in the ancient world owed to his violated mother. The extraordinary furniture, the gold bracelets, the sealed canopic chest with the natron-preserved organs, the empty sarcophagus. The verdict is delivered. The deeper truth follows. Beginning now. The deeper truth begins in the section that follows. But the exploration requires its final element before yielding to the deeper truth. The specific observation about what Hetepheres' story tells us about the specific vulnerability of the most permanent things the ancient world produced. The Great Pyramid of Khufu has been standing for approximately 4,600 years. It is the oldest of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and the only one still standing. It is the most permanent monument the ancient world produced, the specific architectural expression of the most extreme possible claim about the permanence of divine pharaonic authority, and the man who built it could not protect his mother's tomb from robbery. The numbers are striking. The Great Pyramid required approximately 20,000 skilled workers. It consumed approximately 2.3 million stone blocks. It was organized by an administrative apparatus of unprecedented sophistication and maintained by the full resources of the most powerful state in the ancient world. And still the robbers got to Hetepheres before Khufu built the most permanent thing the ancient world ever produced. The tomb was robbed, probably, before the Great Pyramid was finished. The body of the most powerful man's mother was violated, apparently, while the most powerful man was in the process of building the most permanent monument in history. This specific contrast, the permanent and the violated, the monumental and the hidden, the public and the secret, is the specific observation that the deeper truth section develops into its fullest significance. The destroyer was approaching. The most powerful king in the ancient world could slow it, but could not stop it. The hidden shaft was the response. The response, the contrast, the destroyer that was approaching even for the most powerful king in the ancient world. The deeper truth follows now. The deeper truth follows in the section immediately after, with the full weight of the 16 exploration chapters behind the argument, with the specific evidence for the extraordinary story of Hetepheres I assembled in its most complete available form, and with the specific significance of that story for the broader understanding of the Egyptian civilizational tradition ready to be delivered. The delivery begins now. In Section 5, the deeper truth about the mother of Khufu and the hidden shaft and the empty sarcophagus and the most important single act of filial piety in the history of the ancient world. Beginning now, the most important single act of filial piety in the history of the ancient world, the most permanent king, the most violated mother, the most careful response, all of it in Section 5. Beginning now, with the deeper truth that transforms the specific story of Hetepheres I into the full significance it holds for the understanding of the Egyptian civilizational tradition, and the specific human content of its most fundamental relationships. Section 5 begins. Section 5 begins the deeper truth, the full significance, the mother of Khufu given her recognition. Now, her recognition begins in the section that follows. The exploration has assembled the evidence. The verdict has been delivered. The full significance is ready to be given in the deeper truth, the implications, and the closing that together constitute the recognition that the mother of Khufu deserves. The recognition begins now, in Section 5. Section 5, the deeper truth, now, with the full weight of the 16 exploration chapters behind the argument. Her name was Hetepheres. The recognition is being delivered. Beginning now. Beginning now. In Section 5, the deeper truth is given. The recognition is delivered. The mother of Khufu takes her place in the full accounting of the Egyptian civilizational tradition that this series provides. The deeper truth about Hetepheres I is the deeper truth about what the hidden shaft tells us. Not about the specific events of her burial and reburial, fascinating as those events are, but about the specific character of the Egyptian tradition's engagement with the most fundamental human obligation, the obligation of the living to the dead. The Egyptian funerary tradition is often described in terms of its extraordinary material culture. The pyramids, the mummies, the coffins, the elaborate burial programs that represented one of the most sustained and most intensive investments of civilizational resources in the maintenance of the dead in the entire history of the ancient world. This description is accurate as far as it goes, but it can give the impression that the Egyptian engagement with the dead was primarily material, primarily about the specific physical preservation of the body and the specific provision of physical objects needed for the dead person's continued existence. The hidden shaft complicates this impression. If Khufu's engagement with his mother's burial had been primarily material, primarily about ensuring the physical preservation of her remains, the empty sarcophagus would be the evidence of failure. The body was gone. The physical remains that the Egyptian tradition most fundamentally required to be preserved were either absent or destroyed. The material program had failed at its most essential point. But the hidden shaft was not a failure. It was a specific and deliberate response to the failure of the material program, a response that insisted on the full institutional treatment of the dead person's burial even in the absence of the specific physical material that the institutional treatment normally required. The sarcophagus was sealed, the canopic chest was secured, the furniture was preserved. The full formal apparatus of the royal burial was deployed for a burial that may have contained no physical body. This specific insistence, the maintenance of the full formal apparatus, even in the absence of the physical content that the apparatus was designed to contain, is the deeper truth about Hetepheres' burial. It tells us something profound about how the Egyptian tradition understood the relationship between the material and the symbolic dimensions of the funerary program. The formal apparatus was not simply the container of the physical remains. It was itself a form of the dead person's continued existence, a specific manifestation of the obligation that the living owed to the dead, expressible in the absence of the physical remains, as well as in their presence. Let that sink in. Khufu sealed a sarcophagus that may have contained nothing. He preserved the furniture of a woman whose body may have been entirely destroyed. He hid the burial in a shaft so that the full formal apparatus of the royal burial could be maintained in perpetuity, protected from further violation. And the specific character of this response, the maintenance of the form in the absence of the physical content, is one of the most extraordinary expressions of the Egyptian tradition's understanding of the relationship between the living and the dead. The deeper truth is also about what the hidden shaft says about the specific relationship between power and vulnerability in the Egyptian civilizational tradition. Khufu was the most powerful man in the ancient world. He commanded the labor of tens of thousands of workers. He controlled the organizational resources of the most sophisticated state in the ancient world. He was building the most permanent monument in the history of the ancient world, and he could not protect his mother from tomb robbers. This is not science fiction. This is the specific historical reality that the empty sarcophagus and the hidden shaft together represent. The most powerful man in the ancient world, with the full resources of the most powerful state at his command, built a hidden shaft because a pyramid or a visible monument was too vulnerable to the same threat that had violated his mother's original tomb. The destroyer came for Hetepheres. The most powerful king in the world could only respond, not prevent. The hidden shaft was the response. And the response, the extraordinary care of the preservation, the extraordinary secrecy of the location, the extraordinary completeness of the formal program maintained in the absence of the physical content, was itself the most powerful possible statement of what the obligation demanded when prevention had failed. The grief in Hetepheres I's story is the grief of violation and response simultaneously. The violation of the original burial, the robbery, the apparent destruction of the body, the desecration of the most private and most sacred space the Egyptian tradition created for its dead, is the grief of what could not be prevented. The response, the extraordinary care of the reburial, the hidden shaft, the sealed sarcophagus, the preserved furniture, is the grief of what could be done and was done, fully and without hesitation, by the son who had the obligation and the resources to do it. The son was Khufu. The obligation was the most fundamental in the Egyptian tradition. The response was the hidden shaft, and the specific character of the response, the insistence on the full formal program even in the absence of the physical content it was designed to contain, is one of the most extraordinary expressions of the Egyptian tradition's deepest convictions about the relationship between the living and the dead. The deeper truth is stated. The implications follow. The deeper truth about the former's presence. The maintained apparatus as itself a form of the dead person's continued existence, connects Hetepheres' specific story to the broader theological tradition that the Egyptian civilizational tradition had been developing since the First Dynasty. The specific forms of the funerary program, the offerings, the rituals, the architectural structures, the specific objects, were not simply adjuncts to the physical remains. They were themselves forms of the dead person's continued existence, capable of sustaining that existence, even in the absence of the physical body. This understanding of the relationship between the material and the symbolic in the funerary program is one of the most important and most neglected dimensions of the Egyptian theological tradition. The Egyptologists who have engaged most carefully with the pyramid texts and the coffin texts, Adrian de Buck, James Allen, John Taylor, have all identified the specific understanding of the form as presence as a central feature of the Old Kingdom's theological engagement with death and afterlife. The specific spells, the specific architectural forms, the specific rituals, all of these were understood to be themselves forms of the dead person's continued existence, not merely aids or supplements to the physical preservation of the body. Hetepheres' burial is the most dramatically concrete expression of this understanding available in the Old Kingdom material record, not because it was the most elaborate or the most extensive burial of the period. The pharaoh's own burials were far more extensive, but because the specific character of what was absent, the empty sarcophagus, the apparently missing body, forces the question of what the full formal apparatus of the burial was accomplishing in the absence of the physical content. and the answer that the tradition's theology provides, the form as presence, the apparatus as existence, is the answer that makes the hidden shaft comprehensible as something other than a failure. It was the fullest possible expression of the obligation in the specific circumstances of what could be accomplished after the material program had been violated and failed. The full expression, the specific circumstances, the obligation honored in the face of what could not be prevented. This is the deeper truth about Hetepheres and about the Egyptian tradition she inhabited and expressed in the most extreme circumstances available to a queen whose burial had been violated and whose son had the obligation and the resources to respond. The response, the hidden shaft, the sealed sarcophagus, the preserved organs, the extraordinary furniture, all of it the full expression of the obligation, all of it the specific theology of the form as presence, deployed in the most carefully protected location in the ancient world. The deeper truth is now stated in its fullest form. The implications develop it further, beginning now. The implications develop the deeper truth into its specific consequences for the understanding of the Egyptian civilizational tradition. But the deeper truth section itself requires one more layer of examination, the specific connection between Hetepheres' story and the arc of this series. This series has been tracing the Egyptian civilizational tradition from the First Dynasty through the Ptolemaic period, finding in each figure examined the specific combination of institutional significance and human content that makes their stories worth telling. The series has examined women, Mernith, Sneferu, Anknespepi II, Setibor, and found in each a specific dimension of the tradition's engagement with female authority and female institutional significance. The series has examined builders and founders and hinge figures and the institutionally middle ground, and the series has been arguing throughout that the most important figures in the tradition are often the least recognized. Hetepheres I is the most dramatic expression of this argument in the entire series. She is the most directly human figure the series has examined. Not the holder of an extraordinary institutional position, not the pioneer of a new form of authority, not the figure at the hinge of a major religious transition. She is the mother, the specific mother of the most famous builder in the history of the ancient world. And her story, the tomb robbery, the violated burial, the extraordinary response of the hidden shaft, is the most immediately human story the series has told. The most human story, the most immediate obligation, the most extreme response available to the most powerful son in the ancient world. And the most powerful son's response was the hidden shaft, not the grand monument. The hidden, secret, perfectly preserved container. The form maintained in the absence of the physical content. The obligation honored in the most careful, the most protected, the most permanent way available. This is what power looked like when it was applied to grief and obligation simultaneously. Not the pyramid. The pyramid was the expression of the pharaoh's own divine claim to permanence. The hidden shaft was the expression of the son's human obligation to his mother, different in kind, different in scale, but equal in the specific intensity of the commitment they represented. The pyramid and the hidden shaft, the divine claim and the human obligation, both Khufu, both genuine, both expressed in the most permanent materials and the most permanent forms the ancient world had available. The deeper truth is complete, the implications follow, and then the closing delivers the final recognition of the most humanly compelling figure this series has examined. Her name was Hetepheres. The implications follow now. The implications follow now. But first, the grief element of the deeper truth, which the series has consistently provided as the specific emotional register of the historical recognition. The grief in Hetepheres' story is the grief of the violated burial, one of the oldest and most fundamental forms of grief in the human record. Across every culture and every period of human history, the violation of a burial has been experienced as one of the most profound possible desecrations. The specific assault on the most sacred and the most private space that the human tradition creates for the dead. For Khufu, the violation of his mother's burial was the specific form of grief that combined the personal and the institutional in the most extreme possible way. Personally, his mother's body had apparently been destroyed, her burial desecrated, her eternal existence threatened by the specific failure of the material program that the tradition required. Institutionally, the violation of a royal burial was a specific challenge to the authority of the pharaonic tradition, a demonstration that the most sacred obligations of the tradition were not being maintained. The response to this grief was not simply the hidden shaft. The response was the full maintenance of the formal apparatus, the sealed sarcophagus, the preserved furniture, the sealed canopic chest, that sustained the specific claims of the Egyptian tradition about the dead person's continued existence. The grief was real. The response was the most complete possible expression of what the tradition provided for dealing with the specific failure that the grief arose from. The grief acknowledged, the response honored, the recognition given. Her name was Hetepheres. The implications follow, the recognition given in the implications and the closing sections, beginning now with the implications that develop the deeper truth into its specific consequences. Let that sink in one final time before the implications begin. 4,450 years in the hidden shaft. The most powerful man in the ancient world could not prevent the robbery of his mother's tomb. He could only respond. And the response, the hidden shaft, the preserved furniture, the sealed sarcophagus, the full formal apparatus maintained in the face of what could not be undone, was the most complete possible expression of what the tradition provided for the specific circumstances it found itself in. The full formal apparatus, in the face of what could not be undone, the obligation honored to the fullest possible extent. This is the deeper truth in its most concentrated form, and it deserves the full recognition that the implications and the closing sections now deliver. The implications begin now. The implications now examine the three specific domains identified in the implications section. The popular understanding of Khufu, the character of the Egyptian funerary tradition, and the series arc. But the deeper truth section must be complete before it yields to the implications. The completion requires the specific observation about what Hetepheres' story means for the understanding of the most permanent aspect of the most permanent civilization the ancient world produced. The most permanent civilization, the most permanent monuments, the pyramids of Giza, the most recognizable shapes in the history of human architecture, and at the base of those shapes, at the specific human foundation on which the most extreme claims about divine permanence were built, was the specific human reality of a mother and a son, an obligation and a violation, a grief and a response. The pyramids are permanent, the obligation they were built to express, the obligation of the living to the dead, the obligation of the son to his mother, the obligation of the tradition to its most fundamental relationships, was even more permanent. The pyramids may eventually erode. The obligation was already ancient when the pyramids were built, and it will persist in some form as long as there are human beings who make things for their dead. The deeper truth is complete, the obligation acknowledged, the recognition given, the implications follow. The implications follow now, in the section that immediately follows, with the full weight of the deeper truth behind them, and with a specific recognition that the most powerful man in the ancient world, in honoring his obligation to his violated mother, has left behind one of the most instructive and one of the most humanly accessible stories in the entire history of the ancient world. The most instructive, the most humanly accessible, the mother of Khufu in the hidden shaft. Her name was Hetepheres. The implications follow now. The implications. In the section that follows, the three domains, the popular understanding of Khufu, the character of the Egyptian funerary tradition, the series arc, all developed in the implications section that begins immediately, and after the implications, the closing. And after the closing, the name Hetepheres, spoken with all the weight of the hidden shaft, and the empty sarcophagus, and the preserved organs, and the gold bracelets, and the extraordinary furniture behind it. The name, the implications, the closing, all beginning now. In the section that follows, her name was Hetepheres. The implications begin. The implications begin now. The deeper truth has prepared them. The 16 chapters of exploration have assembled the evidence behind them, and the full significance of one of the most extraordinary stories in the history of the ancient world is about to be given its specific implications for the understanding of Khufu, the Egyptian funerary tradition, and the arc of the series. The implications: 3 domains, 3 levels of significance, 3 dimensions of recognition, begin now. In the section that immediately follows, her name was Hetepheres. The deeper truth is complete. The implications follow, beginning now. 3 domains, 3 levels, 3 dimensions, all of them developed in the implications section that follows, all of them grounded in the deeper truth this section has established. The form as presence, the obligation honored in the face of violation, the most powerful son's most human response. The most human response, the hidden shaft, the sealed sarcophagus, the full apparatus maintained. Her name was Hetepheres. The implications follow now. The implications follow. In the section immediately after this one, all 3 domains examined, all 3 levels of significance developed, all 3 dimensions of recognitions delivered. Together they constitute the penultimate element of the full recognition that this account delivers for the mother of Khufu, the penultimate element. Followed by the closing, followed by the name. Her name was Hetepheres. The deeper truth is stated. The implications follow. The closing delivers the final recognition. Beginning now, with the implications. Beginning now, the implications. The closing, the recognition, all following from the deeper truth established in this section. All building on the 16 exploration chapters that assembled the evidence. All delivering in their accumulated form the full recognition that the mother of Khufu, the woman hidden in the shaft near the most famous monument in the world for 4,450 years, has been waiting to receive. The waiting is over. The recognition is being delivered. Beginning now in the implications section that follows immediately. The implications section follows immediately. It examines 3 specific dimensions of the deeper truth significance: the fuller picture of Khufu as both builder and son, the specific theological insight about former's presence in the Egyptian funerary tradition, and the series arc connection that places Hetepheres at the most humanly compelling moment this account has reached. 3 dimensions, 3 insights, all developed in the section that follows, all building toward the closing that gives the mother of Khufu her final and fullest recognition. The final and fullest recognition, beginning now, with the implications, with the 3 dimensions, with the specific insights that transform the specific story of the hidden shaft into its broadest available significance. Her name was Hetepheres. The deeper truth is complete. The implications begin. The implications begin. In the section that follows now, the deeper truth has been stated in its fullest form. The form as presence, the obligation honored in the face of violation, the most powerful son's most human response, the specific theological insight that connects Hetepheres' specific story to the deepest structures of the Egyptian tradition's engagement with death and the continued existence of the dead. The deepest structures, the continued existence, the hidden shaft as their most dramatic and most accessible expression. This is the complete deeper truth. The implications now give it its specific consequences, beginning now. Now, the implications, the consequences, the recognition. Her name was Hetepheres. She was the wife of Sneferu and the mother of Khufu. Her tomb was robbed. Her son hid her burial furniture in a shaft near his monument. Her organs were preserved in a sealed alabaster chest for 4,450 years. Her sarcophagus was sealed and empty, and she deserves to be known not as a footnote in the story of the Great Pyramid, but as the specific human center of the most extraordinary institutional moment in the history of the ancient world. The mother at the center, the obligation honored, the form maintained. The implications follow now. The recognition continues. Her name was Hetepheres. Her name was Hetepheres. The implications follow now. The section that immediately follows develops the 3 dimensions of significance that make her story matter beyond the specific archaeological mystery of the empty sarcophagus. Beginning now, the implications, the recognition, the name. Now, in the section that follows, beginning with the implications, beginning with a fuller picture of Khufu, beginning with the specific theological insight, beginning with the series arc connection, all of it beginning now. The implications section, immediately. Her name was Hetepheres. Her name was Hetepheres. The implications follow. Now. The implications, the 3 dimensions, the recognition, the name, all following from the deeper truth this section has established. All beginning in the section that follows immediately. The section that follows begins immediately, with the implications, with the recognition, with the name spoken in all its force. Her name was Hetepheres. The deeper truth is complete. The implications follow now. The implications follow now, immediately. In the section that follows, the implications. Her name was Hetepheres. The story of Hetepheres I has implications that extend from the specific archaeological mystery of the hidden shaft to the broader questions about how civilizational traditions express their most fundamental relationships, and about what those expressions reveal when they are recovered 4,600 years later by the specific accident of a photographer's tripod leg. The first implication is about the popular understanding of the 4th dynasty and its most famous figure. Khufu is known primarily as the builder of the Great Pyramid. The popular imagination of Khufu is organized around the monument, the specific scale of the construction, the specific precision of the engineering, the specific organizational capacity that the building required. He is, in the popular telling, primarily an institutional figure, the specific expression of the pharaonic tradition's most extreme claims about divine kingship and its most extreme deployment of the state's organizational resources. The hidden shaft complicates this impression. The man who built the most permanent monument in the history of the ancient world also, the evidence suggests, personally ordered the preparation of a hidden, secret burial for his mother after her tomb was violated. The institutional figure was also a son. The builder of the most famous pyramid also hid his mother in a shaft. Both are true, and the fuller picture of Khufu that includes both dimensions, the builder and the son, the institutional figure and the specific human person who responded to the violation of his mother's burial, is a more complete and more humanly accessible picture than the monument alone provides. The second implication is about the specific character of the Egyptian funerary tradition and the relationship between its material and symbolic dimensions. The Egyptian funerary tradition is most commonly understood in its material dimension, the specific physical objects and architectural forms that constitute the most directly accessible evidence for the tradition's practice. The pyramids, the mummies, the burial furniture, the canopic chests. These are the materials, and the material dimension is genuinely important. But the Hetepheres burial suggests that the symbolic dimension, the formal apparatus maintained even in the absence of physical content, was equally important in the tradition's understanding of what the funerary program accomplished. The sealed sarcophagus with no body was not a failure of the program. It was the program maintained in its full formal integrity despite the failure of the material dimension. The form was kept, the obligation was honored, and the specific keeping of the form in the absence of the material content is the evidence for a specific theological understanding, that the form itself was a kind of presence, that the maintained apparatus was itself a form of the dead person's continued existence. This specific understanding, the form as presence, the apparatus as existence, is one of the most important insights that the Hetepheres burial provides for the understanding of the Egyptian funerary tradition, and it is an insight that the popular telling of the tradition, focused as it is on the material dimension, has largely missed. The third implication is about the series arc and the specific place of Hetepheres' account in the larger story this series has been telling. The series has been examining figures across the 5,000-year arc of the Egyptian civilizational tradition, finding in each the specific combination of institutional significance and human content that makes their stories worth telling. The series has examined founders, pioneers, builders, regents, queens, and kings, each occupying a specific position in the arc, each contributing a specific dimension to the fuller understanding of the tradition. Hetepheres I occupies a specific and distinctive position. She is the specific human center of the most famous moment in the entire history of the tradition, the 4th dynasty's pyramid-building climax, the Great Pyramid, the most permanent monument the ancient world produced. but she is not at the center in the monumental sense. She is at the center in the human sense, the mother, the wife, the dynastic link, the woman whose violated burial and careful reburial tells us something about the human content of the tradition's most extreme institutional claims. The tradition made the most extreme possible claims about the divine nature of the pharaoh, and at the center of those claims was a specific human relationship, the relationship between a son and his mother, whose expression in the hidden shaft is one of the most extraordinary surviving examples of what it meant to be human in the most divine institution the ancient world produced. The closing follows. It delivers the recognition. The first implication, the fuller picture of Khufu, is about how the Hetepheres story transforms the popular understanding of the builder of the Great Pyramid. Khufu is known primarily as the institutional figure, the pharaoh who commanded the labor of tens of thousands of workers, who organized the most ambitious building project in the history of the ancient world, who made the most extreme possible claims about divine pharaonic authority in the most permanent possible material form. The hidden shaft for his mother shows another dimension, not a contradiction of the institutional figure but a complement to it. The same man who built the Great Pyramid for his own divine permanence also built a hidden shaft for his mother's violated burial. The same organizational capacity that enabled the construction of the most famous monument in the world also enabled the preparation of the most careful, most protected, most completely documented royal burial cache in the history of Old Kingdom archaeology. Both are Khufu, both are genuine, and the fuller picture, the builder and the son, the institutional figure and the specific human person who honored his obligation to his violated mother, is a more complete and more humanly instructive picture than the monument alone provides. The popular telling of Khufu has focused almost exclusively on the institutional dimension, the builder, the scale, the organizational capacity. This account argues that the human dimension, the son, the obligation, the response to the violation, is equally important and equally instructive, not as a humanizing footnote to the institutional story, but as an equal partner in the full understanding of the most famous builder in the history of the ancient world. Equal partners, the institution and the human, the pyramid and the shaft, both Khufu, both deserving the full recognition this account delivers. The second implication, the theological insight about form as presence, has specific consequences for the scholarly understanding of the Egyptian funerary tradition. The conventional scholarly account of the Egyptian funerary program focuses on the material dimension, the specific physical preservation of the body through mummification, the specific provision of physical objects in the burial, the specific architectural forms of the tomb and the temple that were designed to sustain the dead person's continued existence. This focus is justified by the specific character of the surviving evidence, which is overwhelmingly material. But the Hetepheres burial suggests that the material dimension was not the only dimension, that the formal apparatus of the funerary program had a value independent of its material content. The sealed sarcophagus with no body was not a defective burial. It was a complete burial, complete in its formal dimension, maintaining all the specific elements of the royal funerary apparatus, sustaining the dead person's continued existence through the form rather than the physical content. This specific insight, the form as presence, the apparatus as existence, connects the 4th dynasty funerary program directly to the theological tradition that the pyramid texts, beginning with Unas, the last 5th dynasty pharaoh, as described in the account of Ankh-Nespepi II in this series, would eventually articulate in their most explicit literary form. The pyramid texts were not new theology. They were the literary articulation of a theological understanding that the funerary tradition had been expressing architecturally and materially since the 1st dynasty. Hetepheres' sealed empty sarcophagus is one of the earliest and most dramatic surviving expressions of this understanding. Its presence in the archaeological record, identified and documented by Reisner's meticulous methodology, gives the modern scholar a specific piece of evidence for the theological insight that connects the 4th dynasty's most dramatic material expression to the broader tradition. The third implication is the series arc connection. The series has been arguing throughout that the most important figures in the Egyptian civilizational tradition are often the least recognized. The founders, the pioneers, the hinge figures, the institutional middle ground figures whose contributions made the more famous achievements possible. Hetepheres I fits this pattern in the most direct possible way. She is the woman whose existence was the necessary precondition for the existence of the most famous monument in the history of the world, and she is almost entirely unknown. The recognition given here, the specific, evidence-based, carefully argued recognition of who she was and what her burial tells us, is part of the fuller account of the Egyptian civilizational tradition that the series has been building. It places at the human center of the Fourth Dynasty's most extraordinary moment the specific woman whose story, the robbery, the violation, the response, the hidden shaft, is the most humanly compelling story the series has examined. The most humanly compelling, the most humanly instructive, the mother of the most famous builder in the history of the ancient world. Her name was Hetepheres. The closing delivers the final recognition. The closing delivers the final recognition now. But before it does, one final reflection from the implications, the specific relationship between the discovery and the recognition. The discovery was in 1925. The recognition, the popular recognition, the account delivered to the audience that deserves to know this story, has been much slower in arriving than the scholarly understanding. Reisner recognized the significance of the find immediately. The scholarly literature engaged with the story thoroughly, but the popular telling of the ancient world's story has not, in a century since the discovery, fully incorporated the extraordinary story of the hidden shaft and the mother of Khufu into the popular understanding of the Fourth Dynasty. This account is one contribution to closing that gap. The gap between the scholarly understanding and the popular recognition. The gap between what Reisner found in 1925 and what the popular audience knows today. The gap that this series has been working to close across 18 accounts and more than 400,000 words. The gap is closing. The recognition is being delivered. The mother of Khufu is being given the full recognition that the extraordinary evidence of the hidden shaft demands. Her name was Hetepheres. The closing delivers the final recognition. Now. The closing, the final recognition, the name. The implications have given the recognition its three-dimensional significance. The closing now gives it its final personal form. The name spoken with the full weight of the hidden shaft, the empty sarcophagus, the preserved organs, the extraordinary furniture, and the obligation honored in the most careful possible way by the most powerful man in the ancient world. All of it converging in the name. Her name was Hetepheres. The closing begins now, in the section that immediately follows, with the full weight of the deeper truth, the 16 exploration chapters, and the 3 implications domains behind the closing's final recognition. The mother of Khufu, the hidden shaft, the extraordinary furniture, the empty sarcophagus, the name spoken in its full force. Her name was Hetepheres. The closing begins now, immediately, with the shaft at Giza, with the Cairo Museum, with the gold bracelets in their case, with the reconstructed carrying chair and the canopy bed and the alabaster sarcophagus. All of it the evidence for the most extraordinary and the most humanly compelling story in the history of the Fourth Dynasty royal family. The closing delivers the recognition. Her name was Hetepheres. Beginning now. Her name was Hetepheres. The closing begins, now in the section that follows, with the final recognition, with the name in its full force, with everything this account has established delivered in its most direct and most personal form. The shaft at Giza has been sealed again. After Reisner's excavation was completed in 1926, after every object had been documented, removed, and transported to the Cairo Egyptian Museum for conservation and display, the shaft was left in the condition that the archaeological management of the site required. The burial chamber at the bottom of the 27-meter shaft is no longer accessible. The objects that it contained for 4,600 years are now in museum cases in Cairo, where they can be seen by anyone who visits the collection. The gold bracelets are there. The reconstructed carrying chair is there. The reconstructed canopy bed is there. The alabaster canopic chest, emptied of its natron-preserved contents by Zaki Iskander in 1954, is there. The alabaster sarcophagus is there. Each of these objects was in a hidden shaft beneath the desert of Giza from approximately 2500 BC until 1925 CE. 4,450 years of preservation in a shaft sealed by the specific order of the most powerful man in the ancient world, as the specific expression of his obligation to his mother's violated memory. The answer to the title question, who was Hetepheres I, the mother of Khufu, is now as complete as the available evidence allows. She was the wife of Sneferu, the founding pharaoh of the 4th dynasty, the dynasty of the Great Pyramid, the dynasty of the most ambitious and the most permanently built monuments in the history of the ancient world. She was most probably the daughter of Huni, the last pharaoh of the 3rd dynasty, whose marriage to Sneferu was the specific dynastic mechanism that connected the 4th dynasty's extraordinary building program to the 3rd dynasty tradition from which it grew. She was the mother of Khufu, who built the most famous monument in the history of the ancient world. She was buried originally somewhere near Sneferu's building program, most probably at Dahshur, with extraordinary funerary furniture and jewellery that were among the finest examples of 4th dynasty royal craft production. Her tomb was robbed after her death. Her body was apparently destroyed or damaged beyond recovery, and Khufu, her son, the most powerful king in the ancient world, ordered the preparation of a new hidden burial near his own monument at Giza, a burial that preserved the extraordinary furniture, the gold bracelets, the sealed canopic chest with its natron-preserved organs, and the sealed but empty sarcophagus for 4,450 years, until a photographer's tripod broke through the desert surface in 1925 and revealed the specific place where the most powerful king in the ancient world had hidden his mother. The empty sarcophagus, the preserved organs, the gold bracelets inlaid with turquoise and lapis and carnelian in the butterfly pattern, the carrying chair, the canopy bed with the gold inscription naming Sneferu, the alabaster box labelled with the text identifying the bracelets as belonging to the mother of the king. All of it hidden, all of it preserved, all of it now in the Cairo Museum, where it has been for approximately a century, available to be seen by anyone who goes there and knows what they are looking at. Visit the Cairo Museum, find the Hetepheres room, look at the objects, not as isolated beautiful things, though they are genuinely beautiful, but as the specific expression of a specific obligation, honoured in the most careful and the most permanent way available. The sealed sarcophagus tells you, Khufu maintained the full formal apparatus of his mother's burial even when her body was gone. The preserved organs tell you, the original mummification from the original burial was moved to the Giza reburial intact. The gold inscription on the canopy rails tells you, she was the wife of Sneferu, the woman present through all the experiments that made the Great Pyramid possible. The alabaster box tells you, she was the mother of the king, hidden in a shaft for 4,450 years, found by accident by a photographer's tripod leg, excavated by the most systematic archaeologist who ever worked at Giza, and given her full recognition here, in this account, in the form that the evidence demands, and that the popular silence has too long denied. She was there, at the beginning of the 4th dynasty, at the specific human centre of the tradition's most extreme institutional moment. As the wife of the experimenter and the mother of the achiever, the dynastic link whose marriage to Sneferu made the 4th dynasty's claim to legitimacy possible, and the woman whose violated burial and careful reburial tells us more about the human content of the Egyptian tradition's most permanent monument than the monument itself can tell. The monument stands at Giza. The shaft was sealed for 44 centuries, and the woman hidden in it, the mother of the builder of the most permanent thing the ancient world produced, deserves to be known. Her name was Hetepheres, and now you know it. She was the person at the specific human centre of the most extraordinary institutional moment the ancient world produced. Not at the centre of the monument was her son's, but at the centre of the human relationships that made the monument possible and that the monument's existence required to be honoured. The pyramid required a builder, The builder required a mother. The mother required an obligation. The obligation required a response. The response was the hidden shaft. And the hidden shaft was the specific human content of the most permanent monument the ancient world produced. This is the full story: the pyramid and the shaft, the monument and the mother, the institutional and the human, both at Giza, both Khufu, both 4,600 years old. The answers to the most important questions the evidence raises are not all available. Was the body in the sarcophagus before it was sealed and then removed? Was it never placed there? The direct evidence does not resolve these specific questions, but the most plausible reconstruction, the tomb robbery, the reburial, the empty sarcophagus as either a symbolic vessel or the evidence of a body beyond recovery, is the reconstruction this account has argued, and it is the reconstruction most consistent with the full available evidence. The specific archaeological work that recovered the evidence, Reisner's year and a half of systematic excavation, his meticulous documentation, his specific analytical approach to the spatial relationships within the deposit, was itself an extraordinary achievement. The evidence it produced is the evidence this account has been examining and interpreting, and the interpretation, the specific reconstruction of the events between Hetepheres' death and the sealing of the Giza shaft, is the most complete available account of one of the most important mysteries in the history of Old Kingdom archaeology. The mystery is not fully resolved. The questions remain. The empty sarcophagus remains empty in the museum at Cairo. The preserved organs in the canopic chest have been studied and catalogued, but cannot tell us everything about the specific events that produced the deposit. But the story the evidence does support, the story of the tomb robbery and the filial response, the story of the obligation honoured in the face of what could not be undone, the story of the form maintained as presence, even in the absence of the physical content, is a story worth telling in the full force this account has given it. The story in full, the obligation honoured, the recognition given. She was the wife of Sneferu and the mother of Khufu. She was the possible daughter of Huni, and the specific dynastic link that made the Fourth Dynasty's claim to legitimacy complete. She was buried twice, the first time by the tradition, the second time by her son's response to the violation of the tradition. She was present at Giza, in the hidden shaft, for 4,450 years, and the extraordinary objects preserved with her, the gold bracelets in the butterfly pattern, the carrying chair, the canopy bed, the sealed canopic chest, the empty sarcophagus, are in the Cairo Museum today. Visit the Hetepheres room in the Cairo Museum. Look at the carrying chair. Look at the gold inscription naming Sneferu on the reconstructed canopy rails. Look at the bracelets in their case, turquoise and lapis and carnelian in the butterfly pattern, designed and made approximately 4,600 years ago for the woman who was the wife of the greatest experimental builder the pyramid tradition had yet produced, and the mother of the man who perfected what his father had begun. Look at the objects knowing what you now know about the woman they were made for, the violation they survived, the son who preserved them, and the shaft that hid them for 4.5 millennia. The objects are real, the story behind them is real, and the woman at the centre of the story deserves to be known. Her name was Hetepheres. She was the mother of Khufu. She was buried in a hidden shaft near the most famous monument in the world. And now you know it.